Sure. I'm Karyn Olivier. I'm an artist. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I live in Philadelphia. I'm a professor as well. I'm so happy you're here. There's a lot of competition in this building. So this is great. Okay. This is an image of members of MOVE. MOVE was a black liberation group founded in West Philly in 1972. They were subject to periodic police confrontations and violence stirred by their primitivist lifestyle. Confrontations kind of ebbed and flowed, but they continued to grow and grow. And here you see one of the members barricading and sealing off the compound. So on May 12, 1985, which was Mother's Day that year, the police issued eviction and arrest warrants to MOVE and instructed folks living in the neighborhood to vacate their homes until the following evening. So a standoff ensued, and a police helicopter dropped a bomb on the MOVE compound. Then the famous orders were given by the mayor to let the fire burn. 11 MOVE members were murdered, including 5 children. This is a photograph of Ann Jarvis. She was a West Virginia native who moved to Philadelphia in 1907, and she began a campaign to establish a national holiday for Mother's Day to recognize mothers. The carnation became the symbol to recognize that holiday, and it was her mother's favorite flower. And I was thinking about carnations and how they have kind of various cultural contexts. It's a funerary flower in Jamaican culture, corsages from high school proms, and I was thinking how most people have some sort of relationship to the flower, even if it's just thinking of it as this cheesy, cheap flower. So for my exhibition at the ICA in 2020, I decided to have carnation pins be offered to museum goers instead of the traditional metal pins. And I wanted to acknowledge MOVE, whose headquarters were located about 3 miles away, for the museum, and to think about Mother's Day, the day before the horror that transpired in my city. And I was thinking of this MOVE piece in relationship to the Stumbling Stones Holocaust Memorial, where bronze plaques are placed in front of the homes of those victimized and killed during the Nazi regime. To me, it's one of the most moving memorials I've experienced, and I'm in awe of its kind of scale, but also it's considered the most decentralized memorial found throughout Europe. So it's interesting in what it would be to offer these corsages that, and maybe through this collective act of wearing them or holding the carnation, we form a temporary physical community in the museum, and that then just kind of disperses throughout the city and beyond. So I wanted to create basically a monument, if you will, that would have an intimate and mobile relationship to our body. And in a way, this act would invert the monumentality that we often associate with memorials, and also kind of shift that kind of presumed scale and fixity. So this piece is called Fortified, and I built, with the help of a lot of good folks, a 15 by 30 foot wall that literally becomes part of the architecture, it becomes infrastructure. And it looms really massive and feels quite impenetrable. I think about walls and their disparate functions. You know, they can act as borders, shelter. They protect some and keep others out. They definitely can be signifiers of power. So here instead of using mortar for the bricks to kind of hold it together, I'm using used and worn clothing. So, but when you get kind of closer to it, to the piece, the wall reveals itself to be quite porous. So the cracks are exposed between the brick of what was assumed to be this kind of solid impasse. In fact, it's really malleable and mutable. And when you kind of looked up, there was this feeling of the wall's instability. And I was hoping kind of to toggle between maybe the too muchness of this kind of hundreds of bodies that previously wore these clothings, and the anonymous, but having that positioned up against this up-close intimacy, and here you have this infant's pajama bottoms. So then when you go around the bend, the experience becomes very different. It feels like this tsunami of clothing. And I was thinking too about this piece as a monument as well, maybe a monument to human cost. You know, it speaks to the force, might, and will to construct it. But I think about like most empires and oppressive systems, it could be dismantled too, brick by brick. So this is a photograph I've had on my wall in my studio from a trip in Dakar I took 11 years ago. And here you see someone is selling clothes on top of selling shoes on top of this car cover. And I was thinking about how it felt very similar to Trinidad, where things are repurposed or reused, so the sidewalk becomes a display case, an empty lot becomes a site for a fete, or I was thinking about maybe the mutability of objects, So I kept wanting to do something with this piece, with that photograph, and finally I came up with an idea, and this piece is called Car Cover and Export Shoes. And I was thinking about access and privilege, like who can afford a car, who has to walk or rely on public transport, and I thought about that intensely during COVID. You know, I was also thinking about the West and our relationship to the third and developing world, and the complicated relationships we have to patronage and charity. You know, and often we could think how the West kind of created a lot of the mess through our colonization, imperialism. So I remember hearing on the radio this program after Hurricane Harvey, and it was a nonprofit that decided to distribute debit cards. And it was amazing to hear this woman say, this is what I need. I don't need bottles of water. I need to fix my roof. And I was thinking how there's this kind of assumption that poor people or people in crisis don't know what they need. They don't know what's best for themselves. So I decided to fill this new car cover with thousands of export shoes that were actually destined for the developing world. And I was also thinking, of course, about the refugee crisis. And around the time of this piece, there was a photograph that circulated with that Syrian boy that was washed up on the shore. So I think that was tied up in this piece as well. So back in 2010 it was, I was invited to be part of this exhibition on contemporary Caribbean artists at Real Art Ways in Hartford, Connecticut. And I decided instead of doing something in the museum, I wanted to kind of engage the community. I mean, it's the 4th largest Caribbean community in North America. So I was thinking about, you know, my relationship to Trinidad. You know, I was born there. You know, I left when I was 1, but I spent all my summers there. I kind of never questioned my West Indian identity. You know, I still have a deep love for everything. You know, soca, carnival, all of it. But I started to think that maybe my relationship to my culture was maybe a superficial one. You know, I was thinking, you know, I'd taken one Caribbean literature class in college, and maybe I started thinking, like, when was the last time I read a Derek Walcott book, or reread a classic like Crick Crack Monkey, you know, or picked up an Edric Dandicott book. So I started thinking, like, what can I do with that feeling that I'm having? So I decided to create a library as the remedy. So I was thinking, you know, as an immigrant, maybe others are feeling the same way. So I created this functioning library of exclusively Caribbean titles inside ACA Foods Market, this West Indian grocery store. And the books were organized by category and region. They're organized on shelves alongside customary products and provisions. That whole wall is jerk sauces, so I put the Jamaican authors there. These were the political titles. I thought it was only fitting to put them by the hot pepper sauces. And it was really a trust library. You know, no library card was needed, no specific date of return. You were kind of just trusted to return them when you finished digesting them. You know, my hope was, you know, to expand what we imagine the consumables of a market to be, particularly one that's trafficking in nostalgia for home. So I hoped it could kind of allow us to kind of slow down and browse and relish the sights, smells, and the imperishable produce of our heritage. You know, I was also thinking about disparate economies existing in the same place. So we have lending and borrowing taking place at the same site as capitalism and monetary exchanges. You know, I was thinking too about blind spots and maybe unseen and underused spaces. So in this case, some of the shells are pretty sparse, so I was able to kind of put something else there and reveal a new possibility. You know, here is where my mom was getting ready to prepare our black cake. So I put the Trinidad titles by these candied fruit. Over here, I put the smaller islands, I put alongside the beans for a little humor. I'm not sure if anyone got the humor. Guyanese titles. Children's books were by the cookies and snacks. In the front section of the store had Haitian soft drinks. I put the Haitian titles there. And then at the cultural books, I took a while to figure out where to put these, and I was thinking this was like the perfect spot. You have these ancient medicinal tonic drinks, but then you also have these other drinks that have these offensive names like Bedroom Bully. And I was thinking, and those are Jamaican, not Trinidadian, but I was thinking about the range of culture, and I thought it just made sense to kind of insert them there. You know, I was interested too in new meanings or like poetics that could be created by the juxtaposition of the book titles with product names. Like I love this skin faux card dough and what that could mean. But at the end of the day, you know, this is how it was to function, you know. And I was thinking how, even though I share this common heritage, you know, it's not mine. I mean, I grew up in Crown Heights, that Caribbean neighborhood, so it was kind of left for them to do what they wanted to do with it. So it lasted for about a year, and then they lost, I think, part of the space, and it moved to a community center. And then I did the project again in Toronto, which was a very different experience because it was a much smaller store, and I kind of changed the titles to more reflect the demographics there. So I was invited by Mural Arts and Monument Lab in 2017 to participate in a citywide exhibition that was really trying to think about monuments. And I think Monument Lab now, I think most people know that name. So the artists were charged with the question, what is an appropriate monument for the city of Philadelphia? And we were asked to make what they were calling prototypes. And I was intrigued by two monuments in historic Vernon Park, which is very close to my home. So this monument is dedicated to Francis Daniel Pistorius. He was an early German settler to the neighborhood, which is now known as Germantown. And he led the first Quaker protest against slavery in 1688, so that's almost 200 years before it was finally abolished. So I found out that during World War I and II, this monument was boxed over, it was concealed. It was felt that the language and the look was too dramatic. So the other monument in the park that's centrally located, this is the Battle of Germantown Memorial, which commemorates an American Revolutionary War battle led by George Washington. And I was interested in the fact that it honors a failed battle, you know, which of course speaks to power, privilege, and access, like who gets to have a monument, who is deemed worthy. So I was interested in this immigrant, I mean, Francis Pistorius, and I live on his block now, which is exciting, who fought for the freedom of blacks of slaves in this country, but wasn't considered kind of American enough to continually honor. And then you have Washington, who was fighting for America's liberation from British rule while owning slaves. So I was thinking about the paradox and the complexity of these disparate histories that make up America. So I decided I wanted to use that kind of complication for my intervention and use that for my proposition. So I decided to shroud the Battle of Germantown Memorial in a mirrored surface, in effect boxing it up like the Pistorius Memorial was in years past. And I was hoping that the physical concealment with this reflective surface would allow the monument to feel maybe expansive and accessible, or maybe less intimidating than its colossal nature and material weightiness usually permit. And I was also interested in visibility. Depending on where you entered the park, it appeared as though the monument had disappeared. And I was thinking I wanted the piece to definitely be in direct engagement with the Confederate monument debate that's, you know, still pretty alive in this country. The piece was actually installed a week after the attack in Charlottesville, where we all know peaceful protesters were kind of run down by a driver who was part of the neo-Nazi white supremacist rally. So I was interested in, you know, what does invisibility reveal? Like what does invisibility bring to the fore? What does it challenge? What does this suggest about notions of access and privilege? And then I started to think, if we choose to spotlight the hidden now, how does that shift the legacy and future of the status quo? You know, it's a neighborhood park, and I was thinking of these monolithic, imposing, kind of impenetrable sculptures, and how maybe most park goers take them in perhaps from a physical or metaphoric distance. Perhaps they think the statue is related to someone else's history with kind of little meaning in their lives. And I was also thinking, you know, as a park goer, you probably passed it hundreds of times and kind of maybe register it only kind of marginally after repeat encounters. So I was hoping maybe now the familiar becomes strange or uncanny. You know, so you could see the world around, above, behind you, reflected directly before you. So viewers can engage kind of this different axis, kind of disrupt the verticality we always associate with monuments, and maybe allow the mirror to allow it to be this kind of living, breathing entity, kind of rid the monument of this singular perspective that we know is always false, even though it's supposed to stand in for the universal. So there we go. So there's all this programming around the Monument Lab program, and there was a poetry reading, and there's this poet, Trapita Mason, who's also a historian who lives in the neighborhood, and I'm hearing this poem, and I realize she's talking about the piece I made, which is kind of the biggest honor for an artist to have a poet kind of respond. So I'm just going to play that. Where did it go? There we go.
Monuments of Brown Boys. The artist installed a mirror over the monument, and the people have come to gawk. Rubberneckers wonder what was there before, and you have come too, laying in the cut, statue still for seconds. Your reflection edging off a 20-foot-high bronze looking glass. You are an alluring hunk of stone beguiling me. Yes, you, brown boy, rough cut, monolith. I see you. You are a low-slung jean-wearing, grandmother greeting pillar, an obelisk marking the entrance of your hood. You need to be somebody's memorial, not only when you laid out and lowered in the dirt, your pillow a marble headrest of past tense. He was, he once, he lived. No, you are now in present, alive and in color, and you need to be somebody's walking shrine, somebody's testament, somebody's tribute in this city. You have to be carved, stretched, and erect, a column to buttress boogeymen, the phantoms they say you imagine, the specters and goblins who told bullets and policies and laws that encase you. You need to be somebody's memento. Look how you beaming off that seeing glass. I'm catching your shine. Look at that swagger you carrying, hoodie wearing, fresh fade having, full teeth grinning. You need to be somebody's something to fight for, somebody's celebration, somebody's stone turned monument, carved and smooth, our masterpiece in this city.
It always makes me a little teary-eyed. I was invited by Creative Time to create a work as part of this exhibition in Central Park, and it was kind of daunting, the idea. It's like the last time like a big public art project was Christo's Gates. So I decided instead to just focus on Central Park and maybe kind of reveal what existed at that location, perhaps allow for a reflection on what stands there today. So I decided to create a 3-flip lenticular billboard. So I was reading about the Wisconsin glacier that traveled through what is now New York City 20,000 years ago. So it created the valleys, moved boulders, and formed rock outcroppings, carried debris that was eternally stranded in new locations when the ice sheet melted. And I was interested in this physical evidence, this kind of geological diaspora that can be found throughout Central Park. So it's both everywhere in plain sight, but also hidden by our lack of knowledge or awareness of it. And I was also interested in a more recent history of the site, Seneca Village, and the fact that there's very little evidence of this once vibrant community left. You know, this settlement of mostly freed African-American residents in the 1800s were displaced and kind of scattered wholesale throughout the city when the decision was made to create Central Park. Few traces of their tenancy are left in the bucolic park, and the billboard depicted an image of the glacier, but also a pottery shard that was found at the site of the village. And I saw a real, like a literal and a metaphor connection between the subtle residual artifacts of both the glacier and the village. The third image for the lenticular was a photo of the actual landscape in the park, directly behind it. So then when the viewer kind of moves from one end of the billboard to the other, the glacier would seem to morph into another time period. And it was as if the park goers' movements are controlling time or their understanding of it. The glacier kind of mutates into a shard from a ceramic vessel, a domestic object made from clay dug from the same earth that the glacier traversed before it too vanished. And also, depending kind of on your vantage point, you know, multiple iterations of the 3 images could be seen. At moments, each were distinct. At other times, they reveal themselves as fragments. And I'm always thinking about how history is revealed to us in this fragmentary way. You know, so I wanted this kind of expansiveness of the glacier to be felt in contrast to the scale of the ceramic plate fragment. So I hope to somehow equate the two, like this massive and larger than life physicality of a glacier with the smallness and the intimacy of a domestic object, this kitchen plate. So kind of what would it mean? What does it mean to position these two opposing scales and physicalities into the same image? And also another thing that happened at varying times, the 3 images kind of overlapped or compressed, in a sense, kind of conflating thousands of years into a single image. So this is a 1934 New Deal fresco by Anne Rice O'Hanlon, and it's been at the center of debate at the University of Kentucky for many years. Viewed through contemporary eyes, the fresco sanitizes history and glosses over the brutality, pain, and suffering that slavery imposed, and presents a character portrayal of Native Americans. This is like the only portrayal of a Native American in the fresco. You know, you have the happy musicians playing for the white elite. This boy up in the trees denied access to the performance venue. So the president of the university in 2015 decided to cloak the mural And he was hoping to buy time from to kind of gather from the campus community, like, what should we do? What should we do next? After all these protests have been happening. And the protests were mostly sparked by the black students. So the decision was made to commission a black female artist to make a work that would challenge and confront and maybe jumpstart a corrective and a healing to the pain the contested mural caused. So in the vestibule of Memorial Hall, which is right outside where the lobby where the mural is, I kind of noticed this dome ceiling, and so the dome ceiling is about 16 feet, just for scale, 26 feet off the floor. And I was intrigued by that, and I was thinking, I want to do something with that with my intervention. I mean, the dome ceiling raised interesting questions for me. I was thinking, why was this space designed in this way? What does it mean to create a dome vestibule in an academic building? I was thinking how domes date back to prehistory and have ties to indigenous building traditions, Byzantine traditions, and Islamic architecture. So what symbolism does it have in a building dedicated to higher education? You know, my hope was for this kind of initial recognition into the kind of particularities of the spaces we inhabit, but I was hoping it would lead me to bigger questions, and I always turn to James Baldwin, and I think about his assessment of the role of art is to kind of expose the question the answer hides. So I decided to gild the dome ceiling and inserted painting reproductions of all the black and brown figures from the fresco. So I created copies of each figure and scaled them up proportionately to fit comfortably in the dome ceiling. You know, I think at the heart of my gesture was an act of liberating these beings, these figures from whiteness. You know, what possible reclamation and agency could be gained without the surrounding whiteness that they were previously resigned to. You know, the subjugated, those deemed lowly, were in one sense kind of elevated to the divine. And of course, the gold leaf makes reference to Renaissance and Byzantine churches, so in a way, too, I was elevating them to saints. I was also thinking about celestial beings and the constellations and stars. And I mean, my hope was for these figures on the ceiling to kind of reinforce the notion or possibility of rebirth, definitely spiritually, but also through the viewer's kind of reinvestigation, interrogation, and reckoning with America's complex histories. You know, I was thinking this representation of these figures could make these historic figures in a way could point to some sort of futurity of blackness. Here's the fresco, and the fresco is this horse carriage driver who's resting. I was trying to think what to do with him in the scene, so I decided in my reinterpretation to kind of have it create this almost dreamlike space. So this almost surreal-like scene hints at, or maybe directly points to the violence of the times, as the resting driver descends in close proximity to the sickle of the field hand, most likely a slave working the land. I kept referring to this group of black folks who were outside the train. They didn't have access to the train. And I kept calling them the witnesses, you know, witnesses both to the literal and metaphoric, you know, atrocities and oppressions of the times. And I turned to Frederick Douglass to provide a quote that could kind of shoulder these beings, these celestial beings. So around the base of the dome is his quote. It's from that famous July 4th speech. "There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him." You know, I was conscious of the building being Memorial Hall was honoring Kentuckians from World War I who died in World War I. So I decided to honor four under-recognized Kentuckians in these kind of medallion spaces just below the dome. So this is a representation of Georgia Powers, the first African-American to serve in the Kentucky Senate, sponsoring bills prohibiting employment discrimination and sex and age discrimination. This represents Chief Redbird, a Cherokee, who lived peacefully among white settlers in Clay County until his murder by 2 Tennessee men. The two white men were never tried in court. Peter Durrett, a former slave and preacher who founded First African Baptist Church in Lexington, Kentucky in 1790. And of course, I couldn't find any representations of Durrett in any archives, so I decided to portray him as a silhouetted head. And this was a popular way of making portraits before the invention or common use of photography in the 1800s. But in a sense, you know, I was forced to present him as this kind of almost anonymous figure. And that, of course, speaks about who gets to be remembered, whose image in the 1800s was worthy of being documented, painted, recorded, preserved, who gets to be in the archive. And this is Charlotte Dupuy, who was an enslaved African-American woman who filed a freedom suit in 1829 against her master, Henry Clay, then the country's Secretary of State. The case went to court 17 years before the Dred Scott filed his more famous legal challenge to slavery. So after Clay's tenure in Washington, D.C., Dupuy refused to return to his home in Kentucky and was jailed. So the piece is titled Witness, and I felt like I needed a title that could be both a noun and a verb. It was important for my insertion to serve the particulars of the site. It's an academic institution. I felt like the piece needed to be layered enough where it could withstand repeated viewings by students, by staff, faculty. So the goal was to activate history, keep it alive and rooted in the present tense. My hope was for, that's always the artist's hope, if the work is going to be a catalyst. I was hoping it could be this teaching tool for the school where, different departments can engage in, obviously, art history, religion, economics, history, African and African-American studies. And I was thinking, too, of the kind of complex and various interpretations of gold. I had a lot of questioning about using gold, but I was pretty deliberate about it. I was thinking, yes, it could elevate these anonymous figures to the divine, to saints, but the gold leaf can also be interpreted as a literal reminder of the time when blacks were only valued as currency, as commodity, and the trading and sometimes theft of gold from northern and sub-Saharan Africa during the Roman Empire. So on June 5th, 2020, in the wake of demands for racial justice prompted by the death of George Floyd, the university's president made the announcement that he was going to remove the O'Hanlon mural. And to me, felt like a quick fix. It's kind of to quell the black fury and rage that was being felt from Lexington to Louisville. So the decision was made, made to remove the O'Hanlon mural felt, in a sense, it rendered my work, Witness, blind and mute. There's no way it can exist without the past it sought to confront. And it really felt ironic that the decision to censor the historic artwork in one fell swoop censored my installation too. So kind of instead of embracing the polemics the two works engendered, a thoughtful dialogue between a white woman of 1934, and at the time it was the largest fresco done by a woman, and a black woman of today, kind of the seemingly like good deed was kind of a political correctness from my standpoint was offered up to black members of the university community who opposed the mural. I ended up writing an op-ed right after the decision that was in the Washington Post, and in it I said, Witness was not created to magically dispel or absolve the University of Kentucky from embedded institutional white supremacy and oppression. When I finished the piece, I assumed that that would be when the university's real work would begin, not kind of like clap that they did what they had to do. I thought, there would be programming or seminars or some perhaps curriculum inclusion of these works, a site where the community could kind of wrestle with the very problematic and paradoxical and simultaneous fragmented histories and their relationship to today. So it's a bit heartbreaking. And a strange feeling too, it seems as though the act renders these black and brown folks anonymous once again, for a second time. An attempt to offer what I hope would be agency and autonomy for these 25 souls was dismissed. So I did a year in Rome at the American Academy as a fellow, and I was given this opportunity to do work in this site called Le Mehretu. I did these 6 installations. I'm just going to show one. So this site, it was a former 14th century Florentine convent for cloistered nuns. They were literally, Le Mehretu means walled up. So but by the late 19th century, Le Mehretu was converted to a prison and remained one until 1985. After that time, the idea came to convert it into an art and cultural space. So I created an audio installation of former jail cells that were dedicated to isolating prisoners, like solitary confinement. So the recording is an Italian translation of Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, performed by local activist Antonella Bundy, who's a first-generation Florentinian from Sierra Leone. So it's a 53-minute recording that filled the space. It was really quite haunting. I thought it was like I went in the space and it was almost instant. I knew what to do because I was thinking about it. In that letter, if you've ever read it, he makes a lot of references to the Roman Empire, and he kind of uses Christianity as a way to talk about social justice. I'm going to play just a short excerpt.
Per onestà devo confessare 2 cose a voi, miei fratelli cristiani ed ebrei. In primo luogo, devo confessare che negli ultimi anni i bianchi di opinioni moderate mi hanno dato una grave delusione. Starei quasi per arrivare alla spiacevole conclusione che nel cammino dei neri verso la libertà l'ostacolo maggiore non è l'aderente al White Citizens Council o l'affiliato del Ku Klux Klan, bensì il bianco moderato che ha a cuore l'ordine più della giustizia, che preferisce la pace negativa, ossia l'assenza di tensioni, a una pace positiva, ossia la presenza della giustizia, che dice sempre: sono d'accordo con voi per quanto riguarda gli obiettivi che vi prefiggete, ma non posso essere d'accordo con i vostri metodi di azione diretta, che crede nel suo paternalismo di poter essere lui a determinare le scadenze della libertà di un altro, che vive secondo un concetto mitico del tempo e continua a consigliare ai neri di attendere un momento più propizio. La scarsa comprensione da parte di persone ben disposte è ben più frustrante dell'assoluta incomprensione mostrata da chi è mal disposto. L'accettazione tiepida sconcerta assai più del rifiuto secco. Prima di concludere, mi sento in dovere di citare ancora un punto della vostra dichiarazione che ha suscitato in me un profondo turbamento. Il caloroso elogio che rivolgete alla polizia di Birmingham per aver mantenuto l'ordine e impedito atti di violenza. Dubito che la vostra lode sarebbe stata altrettanto calorosa se aveste visto i cani della polizia affondare i denti nella carne di neri disarmati e non violenti. Dubito che avreste avuto tanta fretta nell'elogiare i poliziotti se aveste potuto osservare il modo sgradevole e disumano in cui trattano i neri qui nella prigione cittadina, se li aveste visti mentre prendevano a spintoni e insultavano anziane donne e ragazze nere, se li aveste visti prendere a schiaffi e a calci neri vecchi e giovani, se li aveste visti, come è accaduto in 2 occasioni, mentre si rifiutavano di darci da mangiare perché volevamo cantare insieme la preghiera di ringraziamento per il nostro cibo. Nell'elogio della polizia di Birmingham non posso unirmi a voi.
I lived in Houston for a couple of years, and I started hanging out a lot at Project Row houses, which I'm thinking some of you may know of. And one year I wanted to do something in the 3rd Ward in this neighborhood. And I was just very aware of kind of the negative advertising we see in black neighborhoods. You know, there's often liquor, fast food, cigarettes. And I was thinking, maybe I could do something where we can decide what we can advertise and celebrate ourselves. So there were these 3, so I decided to build this billboard structure, and I took a photograph of a couple of guys who I used to see hanging out in the park and who I used to hang out with. And I was thinking maybe it could provide this like site for discourse, maybe remind each other that this is our community and we belong here as the gentrification was beginning. And I hope to call maybe attention to fleeting moments, like these simple gestures, like these brief exchanges that create meaning in our lives. For me, this was a kind of a new kind of monument, like we can collectively decide what to celebrate, honor, revere, and remember. You know, I was installing it really late at night, and I was getting frustrated because I was having a hard time with the vinyl. And this guy comes up to me and he's like, "That's Al." He's like, he always has that smirk on his face. It's the guy with glasses. And then he mentioned Will, who's in the middle, and said, you know, he always has a sad look in his eyes. And he's like, I gotta go give him a call. So I thought it was like perfect that I actually did what I wanted to do. So I made them, I put up my billboard, but the idea was that it's really inexpensive to put up billboards. So it was going to be a site for the community, so other things happened. Someone did a portrait of their family. This is a photo of 2 members of the new Black Panther Party in Houston. This was a billboard about, a PSA about food insecurity. And then this happened. Somehow the Manil Museum did an ad campaign that, I don't know how they got access to this billboard structure. What was amazing was happened, like somehow later on, like a week into it, someone else put up a counter billboard. So in the far end, the Manil is a close-up of a Luke Toyman's painting. And then someone did Tupac. How perfect! And brilliant. And what was great about this is like it was no longer an art piece of mine. You know, authorship was totally gone. And I think always thinking public art is functioning best when the public is not thinking about the author of the piece. It's functioning in the world as it should. So I'm going to just show one last piece to let you get up here. This is our more recent work. This sculpture is titled, How Many Ways Can You Disappear? And it consists of pot warp recovered from Matinicus Island in Maine and an almost 13-foot long salt-casted rope and expired buoys. And the ropes lay limp, without function, but still hold the sea. They hold history, memories lost. And I was thinking kind of what remains from that tangle of rope, and I was thinking it was salt. So I was thinking, too, of salt's history and trade and currency, and the practice of trading slaves for salt in ancient Greece. So the title came from a poem, Return Number 14, by the incredible Canisia Lubrin, and I'm just going to read an excerpt of it. How many ways can you disappear a people, dignity by dignity, slant word by slant word, who turn grave, grave by the curve and measure of graves after typhoons, cyclones, and the mounting electro wastelands of the fresh water, the wrath of tumors as bright brush on the forehead or covering over knees. The work of minutes grating against millions of flooded cities. How many ways can you empty a people, hope by hope? I do not venerate men at all. I have a problem with dream. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you. It's also an immense honor to be a part of this project, and Carrie Mae Weems and her brilliance and how she continues to do these projects when she is in these convenings to further develop and enhance and encourage the kind of scholarship that we're all a part of creating and generating. So it's a complete, immense honor to be a part of that. Last time I did a talk with Carrie, oh, by the way, I'm Julie Mehretu. We're supposed to introduce ourselves. The last time I did a talk, or the convening with Carrie for the Guggenheim, I read a montage of quotes from various other people, as I felt like it was a way to talk about my work and my practice, through the words of others. And I was preparing something like that again today, and then last night I kind of turned 180 degrees as I was reading again this piece by Jack Whitten, if you can put his photo up now. Jack Whitten is no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. And he was a really amazing, generous, and loving human being, a painter and artist extraordinaire. He was a very deep touchstone to me, and I go back to his work and writings all the time. Pandemic, I took his notes in the woodshed upstate, and they were something I read almost every day. But Jack isn't here, and as I'm thinking, and as I think through abstraction, I thought it would help a lot to read this short text he wrote called Abstracting the Abstract as part of to bring him into the conversation, and I know that he would want to be a part of it. Painters use Painters use paint to construct light and space. We are all construction workers. Light and space carry all the information necessary for painting. Information for the painter consists of a variety of symbols chosen by the artist to signify a particular subject. Art is what artists do. There should be no limitation or restriction whatsoever imposed on subject, neither political nor personal psychological needs. Art is the ultimate manifestation of freedom. In the loneliness of the studio, painters discover their own light and space. The history of painting is encoded in the light and space of all paintings produced since the dawn of human consciousness. Students of painting must learn to decipher the codes encrypted in the light and space of a painting. The painter's light is not the light of nature. The space of painting is not the space of nature. Light and space are a conceptualized act of consciousness construction. The only difference in making a bridge, a house, a computer, or any other human-made object is that painters use paint in constructing their objects. Painting as object is a thing within itself. I believe that painting is organic and evolves, as do all organic structures. It is ridiculous to think of painting as static. Like all organic structures, painting is in constant motion. Being a product of the human spirit, painting is always restless and never comfortable with itself. This restlessness produces anxiety that fluctuates with the ebb and flow of emotions. Painters must learn to accept anxiety as part of the program. The painter cannot afford to relinquish control of anxiety without experiencing debilitating psychic collapse. Our craft demands a measured metabolic response to inherent psychological liabilities. It is not in our best interest to romanticize madness. The act of applying paint to a surface is an act of infinite possibilities. The diversity of means and image in making a painting are truly phenomenal. I want to speak in particular about abstract painting. I am not a generalist. The original objective of Western abstract painting was to achieve total autonomy from nature. That objective was achieved during the first and second stage of modernism. Postmodern pluralism has run its course. Every known sensibility has had its say. Abstraction has become generic. For abstract painting to maintain its status as significant form in our modern technological society, it must advance to the next stage. There is a new order out there, and it lies beyond abstraction. I feel something that exists in multiple dimensions of space and time and is totally interrelated globally with the various disciplines of human knowledge. These multiple dimensions are located deep in the human spirit. We have entered third stage modernism, which offers the possibility of a new sensibility, one that is not predicated on race, gender, religious, or nationalistic underpinnings. We are new people. As a painter, I realize the need for another language to express these multiple dimensions. We need new tools and processes for making a painting. We need another set of geometries in order to construct these slippery ephemeral structures. Both Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometries have served us well in the past, and fractal geometry has advanced our thinking tremendously. If I am correct about third stage modernism and its offer of a new sensibility, this sensibility could be used to construct a worldview for the modern technological society. Having a worldview is my objective in painting. In order to penetrate this new order that lies beyond abstraction, abstraction must be deconstructed. We have already constructed the notion of abstraction. Now we must deconstruct it in order to reconstruct it as a significant form. Molecular perception is a concept I developed in the late 1970s, which made it possible for me to visualize multiple dimensions in painting. Molecular perception is a unit of perception. It is indivisible, unobservable, unknowable, hidden matter of essence. It is the idios, the stuff that perception is made of. Therefore, it represents the absolute materialization of thought. Mind is matter. The unit crystallizes the meaning of molecular perception. All art is about perception, but I sincerely feel that as an abstract painter, perceptualized abstraction offers the best bet in penetrating these multiple dimensions of space-time. Feeling is a good thing and the most valuable asset of the artist, but feeling alone is not enough to formulate a worldview of this magnitude, and the artist must incorporate the power of will, the perceptual and the conceptual. Planar light is another concept that I formed in the late 1960s. Planar light is concrete, and being concrete, I understood clearly that light can be cut, ground, shaped, molded, laminated, folded, collaged, frozen, and burned. It can be compressed, allowing it to act as a point or to flow like a wave. Planar light and molecular perception are two concepts needed in visualizing the multiple dimensions of space-time as applied to painting. They form the plastic foundation of what I do. The painting is made, it is not painted. I had to change the historical reference of to paint a painting into to make a painting. The painting is constructed. During the summer months, I carve wood. I have 50 years of wood carvings. My wood carvings are the single most important influence on my thinking in painting. 1970 was the year of reckoning, the year of my birth. I had to erase Bill de Kooning's hand from my paintings. My studio became a laboratory for experimentation with acrylic paint. I built a large drawing board on the studio floor that measured 12 feet wide and 20 feet long. It was constructed of 2x4s with a gridded honeycomb support at 16-inch intervals. Covered with a 3/4 inch construction grade plywood and topped with a layer of industrial linoleum for easy cleaning. It was built absolutely level to prevent any arbitrary flow of paint. The drawing board was my easel. The first experiment was learning to lay down a flat slab of acrylic paint 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch thick. I called these paintings the slab paintings. I made a large T, 12 feet from 2x4s, which was used to spread the paint over the canvas, which was tacked to the drawing board. I called the T my developer. Sporting a decent-sized afro, I used my afro comb to rake through the wet slab of acrylic paint, revealing the light beneath the surface. The second experiment, using my carpenter's saw blade, also worked to great effect. The third experiment involved attaching a strip of neoprene rubber to the T, forming a giant squeegee. For the fourth experiment, I removed the neoprene rubber and replaced it with a strip of 16-gauge galvanized sheet metal. Several experiments were made by notching a 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, 1/2 inch, and a 3/4 of an inch into the sheet metal before finally settling on an 1/8 inch notches along the length of the entire 12 feet. My afro comb had morphed into a 12-foot afro comb for a big-headed person. These experiments proved that it was possible to make a non-relational painting, meaning that the whole picture plane was a single line as gesture. I had successfully erased Bill de Kooning's hand from my paintings. The history of painting is a messy, triadic collage of politics, plasticity, and sensibility written by dominant cultural power brokers within the objective of maintaining power at any cost. When I became aware of that simple fact, I realized that sensibility was the Achilles heel of art. My interest in abstract painting started at the crossroads of politics and sensibility. I grew up under American apartheid. Every aspect of my life was dictated by race. White people owned and controlled everything. They controlled all means of employment. They controlled the transportation system. They controlled the supply and distribution of food, shelter in terms of where one could live, and at what standard was totally controlled by whites. Christianity, a Western concept of faith, was imposed on Black people as a means of control. Therefore, even the spiritual was politicized. Black people accepted the imposition of spiritual values with the promise of salvation. At least you shall be free in the afterlife. White Christianity had a major loophole. One could identify with innate spiritual feelings while simultaneously expressing belief in a white God. As a result of this prolonged and systematic indoctrination targeting every aspect of life, African American identity was severely wounded. African American sensibility was the only thing that could not be controlled by whites. Mass media, with all its encompassing and overwhelming influence on culture in general, has propagandized the so-called universal. I thought the mic stopped. African American sensibility was the only thing that could not be controlled by whites. Mass media, with all its encompassing and overwhelming influence on culture in general, has propagandized the so-called universal notion of beauty through mass radio, TV, cinema, etc. Miraculously, African American people have not only survived apartheid in America, but have managed to thrive against it at all odds. The restoration of African American identity became the principal objective of all African American artists working in various mediums at the time. Early in my career, I was attracted to abstraction. With its promise of open-ended freedom. Abstraction gave me the opportunity to contribute my talent in achieving this objective. I found my identity in abstract painting. In the early 1960s, I remember Franz Klein. In the early 1960s, I remember Franz Klein saying to me and a group of young artists, "The minute you step into the studio and pick up that brush, you are part of history and you will never be alone." 50 years later, Franz Klein's words still inspire me. Okay, hello? 50 years later, Franz Klein's words still inspire me to go into the studio and pick up that brush. My studio is a silent place. It is bare and filled with only the necessities of painting. Yes, the studio remains a lonely place, but that's the way it should be. I know that I am not alone. My studio is flooded with nature's light. Nature's light and silence enhance contemplation, and contemplation provides the proper environment for constructing the painter's light and space. Our modern technological society does not encourage contemplation. It demands instant gratification in all things considered to be of value. Painters must learn to slow down. Light is fast and painting is slow. Don't be seduced by instant gratification's promise of deliverance. The rapid advancement of science and technology, driven by the market demands of capitalism, will continue to invade every aspect of our daily lives. Religion has become a global political football. It is no longer capable of providing the sane spiritual sanctuary needed to cope with an increasingly complex world. Art is our best hope for survival. Long live painting. Jack Whitten, New York, March 2013. I think we're running a little over, but I think I have a few more minutes, correct? Yeah. Yes, I'm not done. Okay. So that was really important to me, and he's been such an important influence around thinking about liberation and freedom in painting. And so this is something I wrote for a convening I did at the Whitney when my exhibition closed in August. And I thought I would also read these new notes on painting, August 2021. And it's kind of put into sections similar to a talk Adam and I did together in terms of these notes, and they're written just really as notes. Origins. Abstraction is a vehicle for complexity and unknowing and indeterminacy, a vehicle for speculative thought in the break or the glitch, ways of drawing and making sense of the self, intentionally exploring contradictions inherent to experience of democracy, violence, and racial capitalism and colonialism, mumbling, murmurings, babbling, da-da, ha-ha. Abstraction is heritage of the history of the visual from Pharaoh, Babylon, the caves of Dunhuang, the Nazca lines of Peru, the pyramid of the sun and the moon, out of the gaps and breaks of the fractal logic for West African textiles, Ethiopian illuminated manuscripts, the Vimalakshmi Sutra, music, architecture, astrology, the history of Western painting, desire, failure, retreat, reinvention, creation of something else completely from all that. Abstraction is world-making, an internal coherence, the layering collective reiteration, mimetic negotiations in the Pan-African, Pan-Asian, the global South cosmopolitan, failures of the trope of modernist progress utopias, colonial thought, entropies like pandemic, blur, exodus, unknowing, uncertainty and precarity, political and social vertiginousness, mining the archives for speculative thoughts to untie limits and constraints, mining the all-world archive of Edward Glissant, get at the strangeness of the future image and experience rather than habitually view and decipher, cognizant of the reactive anxiety of challenges to white supremacy globally. Abstraction is a strategy, false binary of abstraction and figuration, bound up with a modern colonial Eurocentric understanding of a nation state, one that destroys worlds, one that takes or finds potent forms of world-making, one that captures and breaks them up into categories of art, architecture, religion, science. Abstraction is a way around that, as a strategy of resistance against flattening, a refusal of description, of language, of containment, a breakdown of national identity, not being reduced to the body, the skin, a place, a language, rather a trajectory for a more complex and discursive creative project embedded in the all-world psyche. This is diaspora. It is a form of knowledge building, invention from all drawn language, visual neologisms, a cycle of new vocabulary from past vocabulary. The pressure of our social, global, and planetary condition makes new meanings in the glitches between the marks of recall, remix, and fresh. Abstraction is the break, an alternative logic. Find that break, that gap, the fissures, undo, pull apart, an open force of unraveling possibility. An emergent logic, so that the absent image becomes a presence in its own right, so that the viewer and the image are intertwined and indistinguishable. The presence of a ghost, paradigmatic, with ideology and myth structure itself, painting as performative time. Quote, how do we practice the continual release rather than venerate the incarceration of the fugitive? What if criticism, which refuses the separation of whatever it is that the artist does from whatever it is that the viewer does, is the devotional profanation of the sacred? Fred Moten. Abstraction is erasure. The erasure becomes a mark, sprayed colored ink, then erased. Erasure can be the most solid parts, more insistent even than the insistent marks, ghosts of the blurred image underneath. Erasure is mining, as excavation, that place of centuries past, but also emergent visual neologisms, since every mark has been made before, every gesture not new, every mark a copying, a theft, remix. Is erasure, as the insistence of invention, wrangling something else from a shared and coded language, the spirit medium of a communal? Abstraction is mining the surround. Mark it, wipe it away, remark, but still an insistence on being, in existing through erasure, as in I am present, I am here. Hineni. Mine for resources, for parts to a future. It is a time-based emergent experience. Abstraction is in the glitch. Lose my sense in my hands and materiality, allowed me to mark and erase back to front. That's important, the inability to fully see, but to feel, to lean hard on intuition, to trust the hand. Backwards. A mining for marks and signs and thoughts, floating in the medium of billions of years of mark making. Push, scratch, cut, stay, premonition, draw faster, last chance, oral clue. Serve intuition, impulse, improvisation. It is symptomatic. Prove it futile as the marks themselves. The marks are comfortable with that. They create the headache. Thank you very much.
Hello. My name is Hopinka. I'm a filmmaker, visual artist, photographer, writer, and this is my website. I use my website because I don't like making PowerPoints. I'm really bad at them. It's one of the main reasons why I became an artist. So I just really want to apologize for that as I guide through this, because it's an easy way for me to go to clips and to jump around and talk about different things. I've been making films for about 10 years now. It's been a really long 10 years, now that I think about it. I actually came across some old videos of me learning this indigenous language from the Columbia River Basin called Chinakwawa. And I was living in Portland at the time. I grew up in the Northwest in Southern California, so I'm primarily from the West Coast. And it was when I was living in Portland that I first started learning this indigenous language, Chinook. And I met a language teacher, and he taught me how to speak and how to teach. And that really happened about the same time that I first started picking up a camera. My friends and I have been talking a lot about the state of indigenous cinema. I'm Ho-Chunk and Pachunga. My tribes are from Southern California and Wisconsin. And it's been a big part of my life and who I am and how I understand the world and how I navigate the world. And film has always been something that I've been really interested in as a viewer, but also a lot of questions about how to make them. And about 10 years ago, my friends and I decided to make a film, a documentary, about an indigenous experience, about us building a traditional fishing scaffold on the Columbia River, catching fish. But one of the main conceits was we didn't want to explain what we were doing. We didn't want to teach an audience about how we've been fishing there since time immemorial and since, I don't know, and what the significance of it is or what the instructions are. We didn't want to be a sort of an educational documentary, which is a space that a lot of indigenous films are forced to make based on the funding that is available, which is good and it's important to have those films, but there's also a lot more other conversations that are important to define an indigenous experience, other than the ones that we're asked to present from outside sources, usually white sources. And a lot of that is educational, focused on trauma, focused on poverty, focused on the reservation system, focused on a romanticized history, and focused around genocide. And these are things that are very much part of our lived experience every single day. And the question that we had while making this film was, what else is there? Can we just be friends that are catching fish? Are we allowed to do that? It's like, yes, we are. And so with this film, like, it just really started snowballing into these other questions, these other bigger questions about indigenous cinema. And to jump back, at the same time is when I started learning Chinook. So in tandem, the last 10 years of my life have revolved around indigenous language revitalization, the urgency of that, learning my heritage languages, learning others, and supporting those communities as they try to save their languages, which are such a big part of their culture, our culture. And at the same time, these themes appear in my films. Now, I arrived at experimental cinema, which I didn't even know what it was until I started grad school, as a way to, I don't know. Well, at first, when I first saw experimental film, I had no idea what it was, and it just annoyed me. I was just, what is this? I'm not used to this. What are you doing? But soon, I saw a few films by Peter Rose, a beautiful filmmaker that plays around with language and the possibilities of language and translation and authority. Besma al-Sharif, a Palestinian filmmaker who uses text, who uses the digital image, who uses a lot of artifacts, who uses a lot of impositions to express the complexities of these different sort of relationships and power dynamics. And those films just really opened up my eyes and my heart and my mind into seeing what the possibilities are with cinema. And I'm going to show you a selection of actually one of the first more experimental quote-unquote films that I've made. This is called Wawa. So this is a film that incorporates a few different elements of where I was at that point in my life in 2013, 2014. I did a series of interviews with Chinook Wawa speakers in Chinook, the idea being that I would make a documentary about Chinook in Chinook and talk to these different fluent speakers and get their perspectives about their lives, their relationship to the language, and how it would work. But I never finished that film. Instead, I made a 6-minute short film using one of those interviews with the fluent speaker, Henry Zank, and tried to express the frustrations of language, the challenges of language, that moment when you first start to learn a language and you want to stop thinking in your English brain and start thinking in your Chinook brain, and how that's a battle, the way that you translate in your head, the way you think through these different words and what they mean. And this film is a little bit of a meditation around that. So I'll play about, maybe from, they'd have to admit, yeah, right there. So one of the main conceits of the film is, it's 3 different sections. The first one being my friends and I, actually in New York City, engaged in a Chinook Wawa language lesson. The second section is a talking head interview of Henry Zank. And the third section is me reading a recording of a transcript from Henry Zank and Wilson Bob some 30 years before. And in this film, there's 7 generations of language speakers represented. There's Wilson Bob, who taught Henry Zank, who taught Evan Gardner, who taught me, who was teaching Susanna Ciotti, who was then teaching David Edwards, who was teaching Susanna Ciotti. So 7 generations of speakers represented in this video, and that felt significant because it was something that I hadn't really thought about before, especially while in high school Spanish. I was never really concerned with where my Spanish teacher learned Spanish or who was her teacher. But it is a concern in indigenous communities. You want to make sure to acknowledge where your dialect comes from, where your accent comes from, and who taught you, so that you can tell your students who taught you. So I'll play a few minutes of this to give you an idea of what I was thinking about. I can't speak well. I can't speak Chinook Wawa well. I say it all. I'm fooling you. You don't know anything. You just blab on. What? On Kappa. This nigga's kind of Conway son, on my nigga's nigga to get bed, but on because Conway son, she never get up, nigga, clean out the coffee, it's come coffee, knowledge, the Luke.
Dennis Colpus, Boston Telecom, plus Wall, be good, Chin Iga Iskamo Markava, Ugu Eat Ulman, Wilson Bob, Niga Wawayaga, Hadamiga, P. O. Dread Cog was Dread Tach Labushaga.
There's not a little bit you know, not even a little bit do you know. That's not even a little bit you don't know. You don't even know a little bit. You don't know very much anyhow. A miserable excuse for an Indian you are. You can't speak Chinook well. Later, you'll be good. With eye to you talking a lot, later on you truly will speak it really well.
Weak Drepsush, but
you know, Paswid Country Yaga, Conducts Boston Lawn Yaga, Mook, Schweder, Pada, Conway Boston Telegram Yaga, Conducts, let's go, Kada. But, you know, so I have to, Yaga, talk the bush, you know, talks the Ugu Punchi, you know, weak Yaga, Dretsush, Musa, plus Dretsu Yaga. You know, dread pistols, you have to
alle ik de mij genoemd.
like a ton of lock, you have a ton
By just blabbering, you'll disappoint me. But say all that you're saying, fine. You go say it, just talking every which way. You want to talk anyway, but you know if you don't know how to say it, later on you will learn how. Oh, I don't speak well now, but I will speak Chinukwawa really well.
Like I said, the Milwaukee, I got tons of Milwaukee shower, Mars, the country, come to Boston, Blue Schweder, talks to Ugu Manchi, you know, weak yoga, Gret Flush Musa, plus Gret Blue yoga. Pistols vi har got dolls i plus like a ton of Milwaukee, I got ton of Milwaukee shower, money, plus the country.
Ja, den Google i mig Plaza Kilpatrick Chicago.
Ja, Chicago.
That's a lot. I think a lot about just the different ways that film can be perceived by someone that speaks Chinook, that understands Chinook, versus someone that doesn't. That film still gives me a sense of anxiety every time I listen to it or hear that soundtrack with just all these different voices coming in, all these different words, and all these different sort of things that are collapsing on top of each other into this film, which is very much what I was trying to express, just the sort of frustration and also this burden. Not a burden in a negative way, but just the thing that, you know, you gladly accept the responsibility, but you want to find support structures in place to help you carry that, because it's important. And Henry is important to me, and Evan's important to me, and Wilson is, and just these different relationships to these people. Even though I've never met Wilson, I think he died the year I was born, actually, in 1984. But still have a relationship to him through this archive, through this text transcript that I was reading of Wilson and Henry when Henry was probably 40 years old in 1983, going to White Swan, Washington, and talking and hanging out with Wilson and learning the language. And having this document, you know, I want to take it out of the archive. I want to take it away from this sort of like, you know, like ivory tower of academia and linguistic study and look at the things that they're saying. And look at the way that Wilson is teasing Henry about the way that he speaks, you know, and telling him, you know, when you learn how to speak, then you'll be a real Indian. And this is this white guy from the Bay Area, you know? And just like that sort of complicated relationship around identity and what are the essentialized ideas that we're working through when it comes to language and to culture and to community. So I was thinking about all of those things and I just jammed it all into this film. This was an important film for me to make personally because it's just, you know, finding a formal outlet or a formal approach to try and address these things that I hadn't really been sure about how to address or to express or to communicate. And just trying to figure out like how then does that form an indigenous cinema, or what is an indigenous cinema? Who's making the films? Like I mentioned, I chose these three sort of formal approaches, like a cinema verite approach, a talking head, classic documentary approach, and a reenactment where I'm reading these things. And all three of those are seen in documentary films. And often I wonder have been wondering, for a long time wondering, who is making these ethnographic films, who's making these documentaries, and how are they often framed? It's often at a distance, at a remove, very flat color palettes, a certain sense of authority or a sense to like qualify and quantify what culture is or what indigenous people are and who we are and what we're doing. And so moving forward with that, I really started to question things like literally with subtitles, you know, who's making the choices in translation? Is it into Tonto speak, you know, which often you'll hear a lot of native languages or native speech translated into or represented as? What are the choices for words? And like that was a big question I had about this with Chinook Wawa. You know, like there's not a lot of words that exist in Chinook that also would exist in English, or like how it's like a very loose Venn diagram of the overlap, and one word can mean so many different things in Chinook, and one word can mean so many different things in English, and they might intersect in this small little sliver. And so what does that mean for translation, or for the possibilities of understanding, or getting outside of understanding Chinook through an English filter, an English gaze, an English lens, and everything that comes along with that. So I, like moving forward with just thinking about the history of ethnography and documentary and just authority, I then made a film called, made a few films, but this one called Jaji Aprox, I made it in 2015. And this is using recordings of my dad that I'd gathered over 10 years at that point. I think I started in about 2005, and we had a very strange relationship, very strained relationship, but this was a way to try and get closer to him. He was a singer, he was a drummer in the powwow circuits. I'm not sure if you're familiar with powwows, but there are these happenings that happen all over the United States, usually in the summer on weekends, where you gather and dance and you sing. And so my dad was a powwow bum. I love him, but he's a powwow bum, just going from powwow to powwow, weekend after weekend. And so when I would see him, I had a recorder, and just an easy way to get to talk to him was just to say, hey Dad, here's this recorder. Sing me some songs that you made. Tell me a little bit about powwows, what it was like for you. And it was just a big part of both of our lives. Like my mom was a dancer, my dad was a drummer, and I started dancing when I was 4 years old. So it was very much an important part of like who I am and understanding like a neo-cultural sort of practice of indigeneity in this country, which I have a tangent about, but I will save that for another time. And so I made this film while taking this road trip across the western part of the United States, from Wisconsin to Washington to see my mom, California to see my dad, Southern California to see friends, driving to the Southwest, back up through Missouri to get back to Wisconsin. It was like a 2 or 3 week road trip I took by myself. I had a camera, and I was shooting a lot on the road. And I was listening to these songs. Over 10 years, I would always listen to these songs while I was driving and learn them and sing along with them. And while making this film and while shooting this footage and listening to these songs, I started to think about the sort of like parallels between my life and his, how I'm traveling the same roads that he was when he was my age, and how, I don't know, how the road also in terms of like powwow culture functions as a conduit between these different sort of locations of the reservation, and my family getting in our powwow van and just going from powwow to powwow over the course of the summer. And that sort of non-place, that space of the road becomes a space of community as well. And I started thinking about these approximations. Jaji is Ho-Chunk for father. In a direct address, it changes if you're talking about them. It would be Jajiga if I was talking about him. But I'm talking to him. And these images are an approximation for a relationship to this person. These recordings are an approximation for a relationship to this person, as well as these landscapes and just mediation. And so I start the film in a somewhat sort of clinical way of, this is my father's recording, March 2nd, 2000, blah, blah, blah. And that tapers, just looking at the sort of ethnographic gaze in the distance that one views one's own culture and one's own history was something I was thinking about. But I'll play a few minutes of this as well. Maybe right here. Jaji's recordings, December 22nd, 2007. An old song from 1977. Ho-Chunk's song 1 instead, with a crossfade into my accompaniment. Majiaji's recordings, Porcupine Traveling Song, June 4th, 2009, 8:48 p.m.
These are one of the older songs that I know will give you Porcupine. It's just a prayer song, but it's a traveling song. Every time we go to a hollow, we all gather outside the car. We gather in a circle and we sing this song. To ensure our safety wherever we are today, like a protection song.
Stop that one right there. It's right at the end, right before the credits, but I like this image of my dad. I miss him. And it's these relationships that are hard to express or hard to quantify and to qualify through a film means, you know, and what does it mean to make a film that's searching for a relationship to a person that's strained, and there's a lot of historical trauma around that and the reasons why it was a strained relationship. And to be searching through these sort of formal strategies. I mean, you notice the text was in the middle of the screen. That was because I wanted to have the subtitle be part of an image, to be central to the image, to be an image itself. The film begins with that same sort of like my dad talking about being on the road and hearing the sound of the road. And in it, I I title him, I translate what he's saying into the International Phonetic Alphabet, which I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but it's a tool used by linguists to write sounds as they actually sound. I mean, we all know what a mess the English language is in terms of its written format. This is a way to try to write sounds through different characters, and it's also used by linguists to help tribes, indigenous communities, develop orthographies or writing systems for their languages if they don't have one, so that they can use it as a tool to teach and save their language. So I transcribed everything he's saying in English into IPA, and it looks like a foreign language. Actually, sometimes people think that it's a native language, but it's not. It's just English, which is a foreign language, I suppose. And having these different sort of tactics to establish some sort of distance and establish some sort of closeness and establish some sort of communication, like these are all, to me, propositions or questions about what an indigenous cinema could be, which I think is like what's really exciting about it. I mean, I often think that an indigenous cinema is making the films that no one is asking you to make. So no one's asking me to make a meditation on the landscape and my father in recordings, There's not a lot of RFPs for those kind of films. And with that, I mean, I also began to move more into mythology. Like, I often describe my work as ethnopoetic, which is a term that I got from this essayist, the scholar, Elliot Weinberger, who proposed that once people who traditionally have had cameras pointed at them by ethnographers, what happens when those people pick up the cameras and start pointing them at things that they want to look at? What we want to look at, what I want to look at, not the things that are prescribed to us by an academy or an institution that is not a part of our community. And so that term really resonated with me for a long time. Until I started thinking about, like, why does the ethno have to be involved? Like, why not just get rid of the ethno? Because I don't necessarily want to be making works that is in response to a predominantly white Western tradition of understanding ourselves. It's just that sort of reaction to and against that I wanted to kind of get away from and figure out where can you go if you just abandon it altogether and start thinking about these different relationships between, I guess, mythology is where I went to next with that. Like, what are these relationships to myth and to religion and to reincarnation, to these sort of spiritual beliefs that exist outside of sort of Western Abrahamic religion or tradition in terms of understanding how to then view the afterlife or life itself. And I made this film called I'll Remember You As You Were, Not As What You Become. It functions both as an elegy to this native poet, Diane Burns, who I love very much, and she passed away in 2006. I mean, I first heard about her, I think in 2007, actually, and she has this one line from one poem called, the line goes, "This ain't no stoic look, this is my face." And it just like hit hard because, I mean, getting told, you look stoic, smile, don't look so mean. And it's just like, how am I not supposed to? This is my face, man. And it's just like, right, finding that in poetry, finding that in spoken word, finding someone to express that idea was just really powerful. And I found this clip of Diane reading at the American Indian Community House here in New York City in '96, I believe. And it's like this 10-minute performance during a variety show there. And it's just such a beautiful performance. And I had this clip for a while, and I've been thinking about reincarnation for a while, and I've been thinking about the afterlife for a while, and I've been thinking about all these different things and how to combine them, or how they might interact with one another. And in it, I made this film. What I want to show you, kind of like this sequence. Yeah, I'll show you the first 4 minutes.
Yeah, a lot of us drink too much. Some of us can't drink enough. This ain't no storybook. This is my face. There was an article in the New York Times the other day about, I don't know if you know about this, but they're going to destroy a whole species. The species is smallpox virus. It's kind of strange. I have a story called Man Dance. About the Man Dance.
So yeah, that was like the first 4 minutes of I'll Remember You As You Were, Not As What You Become. And there's quite a few things I was thinking about through that, one being myth, one being reincarnation, and once how the film functions as a eulogy. The text piece at the beginning is this thing called a calligram and I read Apollinaire's book, Calligrams, and it just thought it was really beautiful and wanted to apply that to effigy mounds. Effigy mounds are these large earthen mounds, maybe as large as this room, if not larger, found throughout central Wisconsin. And there's a political sort of kerfuffle. Yeah, it's a nice word. English, I love it. So when settlers came in the 1800s, you know, they discovered these mounds, and their conclusion was that they were made by some great race that existed thousands of years ago, the mound builders, that my tribe, the people that lived on this land, were too uncivilized to have built, and we must have driven them out, or are squatters on this land, which is pretty fucked up. And it's just like, it points to a lot of issues around the manifest destiny, the sort of justification of how science is used, archaeology is used to justify removal. And you know, my tribe, we have stories about these, like we're the mound builders, these are our ancestors. And so it's also, you know, has to do with land as well, and NAGPRA issues of, you know, if you can't name whose tribe built this, then you don't have to give it back. And so that's like a whole other thing that goes into that. And so it's just a simple gesture of trying to recreate these texts in the shape of effigy mounds, also appropriating ethnographic texts by Paul Radin, who wrote about my tribe in the early 1900s via an informant, and trying to take that text back as well. So it's a gesture of reclamation. It's a gesture of trying to give something new life, a form of reincarnation, I suppose, and how that then shifts or shapes these different ideas and different expressions of religion and mythology today. I think a lot about mythology, especially as I've turned a little bit more away from the more documentary or ethnographic approach to things, and wonder a lot about what it means to make a myth, what it means to tell a story, or, I don't know, to imagine like what the myth makers, the first person that maybe told this one myth was going through. What were they feeling? Were they going through a breakup? Were they having a bad day? You know, just like humanizing them in a certain sort of way. Because think about it, like once these myths were documented 100 years ago by, you know, an ethnographer, anthropologist, whoever, they kind of got written in stone. Like where stories change and shape over time by who's telling them. The storyteller might tell the story a different way to a specific audience, certain people in the room, and how it just constantly changes. You know, it has life. But then once they were documented 100 years ago, that kind of stopped. They were put in amber like the mosquito in Jurassic Park, you know? And I suppose in this metaphor, I'm John Hammond, and trying to extract them a bit, and to think about like what it means to make new myths, or what it thinks to about what does it mean to like re-engage with this process, and think about how film can be used to be making myths or telling stories, imagined or otherwise, and what sort of things are those trying to communicate, and how to then reclaim them in some sort of way. And even in part of the bigger indigenous cinema conversation, what things can we show on film and what things can't we? What things are only for our community, that it might be sacred, that might be personal, that might be special to a clan or to a family or to whoever, that you don't want the world knowing. As I tell you, like, you know, 100 years ago, anthropologists didn't care, you know? They thought if they asked the right questions or paid the right informants, you know, everything's published in a book and it's out there. And there's a lot of things out there that shouldn't be. And that sucks. It's really hard. And so even with these films, I try to draw these boundaries and draw these lines of things that I don't want to share, that I don't want to explain. But how do you express that through the context, through the images, through the montage, through the colors, through the saturations, you know, through these things that are ineffable, and how can they also be communicated to people that are outside of that community? Where it's like you may not know what I'm pointing at, but you know that I'm pointing at something. you may not know what I think about something, but maybe you know how I feel about it. And those sort of communications, those sort of sympathies, empathies, I don't know what the word is, are ways of bridging and gaining some sort of agency through what the possibilities are of an Indigenous cinema and representation and power and control over the stories we tell and how we tell them. There's quite a few things I think about, but I'll show you this little clip of a film called Fainting Spells, which is that, exactly what I was talking about. There's this plant that I found in a Ho-Chunk ethnobotany text called the Hoiska, or the Indian pipe plants, and its use is to revive people that have fainted. And I looked far and wide and asked a lot of people, but I couldn't find any sort of myths or stories around it. It's just something that exists. And so I decided to make a myth for it, my own myth. And I think I'll play that, and we'll see where we are. So the film goes on for another 10 minutes, I suppose. But it's I don't know, it's a lot of questions that I think experimental film offers, or maybe provides the means to asking, that I'm really interested in. And especially around what the idea of an Indigenous cinema is, and how this is very one small slice and sliver. It's part of a conversation. It's part of, I do like thinking of these films as propositions, as questions that should be in dialogue and should be answered by others aside from me, and how there are many different ways of approaching myth and story and present Indigenous experience that are outside of my own, and how I'm constantly looking for others, other Indigenous people that are asking questions that are making work, that are uncertain, because it's lonely out there, you know, it's hard, no one wants to be a token, no one wants to be the only one, and like finding other Native filmmakers of the last like 5-6 years that are doing interesting things and challenging things and things that are really amazing and beautiful and exciting has been really amazing to just like not feel alone in this world. And I encourage you to seek them out. Like, my voice isn't the only voice. There's so many other voices out there, people that are doing work that is film, that is art, is painting, traditional crafts, beadwork, language, teachers, etc. They're all out there, and they're just, you know, waiting for you to come find them and talk to them. But I think that's all that I have to say. Thank you so much for your time and attention. The red in the first film was actually informed by two sources. One, Henry made these like documentation videos from the 80s, and they like the old VHS cassette tapes, and they began with red screens, and I just really liked that aesthetically. And also in the film In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai, the opening sequence of titles is red with like black text, and I just thought that was really striking. And just there's a lot of different reads that can be applied to that, like the references that I'm making to these two films, to these two histories, as well as the cultural one too, a signification of that color, especially in the tribes in that region. Thank you.
We're talking about a third thing today, and that third thing, we're talking actually, I think, about a lot of third things today. One of them is a sort of collaboration that we have been sort of building towards. I am a designer and an artist, and I work between architecture and performance. And Geneva.
I'm an artist and composer, sound artist, writer, teacher, collaborator.
Yeah, collaborator. You know, we're going to be talking about is a body of work that I've been developing since I met Carrie, who I want to thank profoundly for including us here today and creating this context. I'd also like to thank the Armory for all of the people who have supported us to this point. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to our friends and my wife who came. I've been, since I met Carrie in 2005, I have been making inflatable works, inflatable installations, inflatable spaces, and what started that exploration off was a body, this kind of weird body, and in some way that's a third thing that we're talking about, is a body. My experience of my own body is kind of fraught. It's roily and problematic and titillating and leaky and doesn't do what I want it to do most of the time, I'd say. Geneva, when we were preparing for this talk, you were talking about body in a similar way.
Yeah, I also find myself most of the time wishing I had no body at all. I think we were talking about, you know, there's always some component of the body that you don't want, and I think I said, well, I just don't want it at all. I want everything that moves around and through it, but I don't want the decaying object itself, and I don't want the thing that takes up space.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this first work that I've got up here is called A Sack of Rooms All Day Long. And it's an inflatable installation that's made up of 4 sacks, 4 rooms that are stuffed in the skin of a 500 square foot house, and that house, those rooms are 800 square feet, so they start to steal space from one another and start to like, you know, move and roil, and you know, it's imperfect. And the thing that I was wrestling with was the sound of the fans. That was that part of that body that I was just like, wow, I just wish that wasn't there. sound work to kind of account for that sound, where he recorded the sounds of blowers just blowing, and even when they weren't doing any work, there would be a blower sound to kind of break that connection between what you see and what you hear. And as I went on, you know, the approach that I took to sound was quite similar there. Go back here. Okay, so that's. We need to turn this up. This should be set here. I think we've got a good thing to do this now. Got a little sound thing. Basically the works to this point, there, and we'll hear this one in a minute. This is called The Sound of the Future, and it's an inflatable work that's made up of silver and fur, and it was set to a kind of very a techno beat that slowed down from 5 minutes to 50 minutes, and there's this rumbling that happens, and these inflatables, they move in a very, very slow way. And so it's almost like Buto in a sense. And so hopefully we'll
well, I guess I'll sort of talk about my own work as transition. I'll let this play and then I'll talk about it. To me, sound is always something that is happening in the moment, in the present, in a room, to your body. Sound is happening when it's coming from your own body, when it's coming from your breath, when it's coming into your ears, when it's coming into your chest or your bones. Everything already is vibrating and emanating a certain frequency. It's just a matter of when your physiology allows you to perceive it. And so that piece, Turning of the Day, is meant to be played at a very specific time of day, 11:30 to midnight, and it's meant to be listened to at half attention so that it is felt more than it is heard, and it is experienced more than it is read. And it's mostly low frequencies. I mean, it's ultimately made for like 2 subwoofers to specifically rattle a room. And a lot of my compositions are meant to be felt in architecture or the architecture of your own body. My work a lot of the time thinks about different kinds of landscapes that are not just natural geographic landscapes. The body is a landscape, itself as a landscape, culture, a room. And so that work is a very, very, very restrained version of a larger practice that I have. Yeah, you will play the next one. We'll listen and then I'll talk again. This is again an excerpt from a much longer piece that I released this year that I made over the summer up in the Hudson Valley. And it's one excerpt of one channel of like a 34 channel composition. And I have a background in singing, and I'm a flute player and I'm a woodwind player essentially. And so much of my approach to sound has had to do with feeling how things happen, feeling how I make things happen, and the body as this breathing organ, this sounding organ, the body as a throat, essentially. And so I still use flute, and I still use breath, and I still use voice all the time in my compositions. But I also started to become interested in how I could work with bigger bodies and vibrate those in the same way that I do my own body. And so I found all of these steel pipes and started playing with those within architecture in this large exhibition space I was in over the summer, and bouncing that sound across all of these rooms from side to side, and then recording the decay of sound that originates with my body, my breath, found material, moves through a space, and then lands in a microphone. And then, this is like a six-minute long video that's documentation of an installation that I made over the summer also. I'll let you listen and watch, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it afterward. that there's a lot happening in that room. But probably the most important thing to know is that this is a work it's based in a bunch of research about Southern California wildfires and the experience, what that's like. I've lived in Southern California for about the last 16 years until recently I moved to Pittsburgh, partially because I can't deal with the smoke anymore. I can't deal with the heat and the wind and the fire, and the experience that engenders in me is one of constant fear and anxiety and heightened perception. And I think that heightened perception can be really wonderful, especially for artists. It can teach you new ways of articulating things that are hard to articulate. But this sort of research led me to a canyon where there had been a wildfire, and I could hear this sound that was I was just associating with the wind, but it had this harmonic ebb and flow, and it would change pitch, and it would come and go depending on where I was standing in this canyon. And I sort of ran around the canyon trying to figure out where it was, and I got to the top of the ridge and realized it was the Santa Ana winds, which are quite powerful, vibrating the power lines at the top of the ridge. And I was like, what? And I discovered that power lines act as incidental aeolian harps, and aeolian harps are ancient global instruments that are only played by the wind. And the wind creates a specific physical action that creates a vortex on the strings that make a pitch, and then they sympathize with each other, and they pick up their harmonics, and they make this sound. The significance of the power lines being the thing that makes this alarm, this unearthly alien sound, to me was really powerful. The relationship between power lines and fires and space and wind in California is really strong. So in this installation, I'm making these aeolian harps, but I'm making them not in nature, which is where they're normally found, but I'm forcing them in an industrial situation, using the power grid, using these industrial fans. And that's what you hear, is that high-pitched sound that comes and goes. You hear wind, you hear fans, and you hear these aeolian harps. And so that's kind of what I've been doing most recently, is taking this interest in vibration, wind, breath, geography, and starting to play with strings. As a woodwind player and a vocalist, that's very different for me.
So Geneva is the one that I wish I had met for this work. So this is a work that I did in Munich in 2019. It's called Sense Factory. And I collaborated with the artist FM Einheit. And FM Einheit is from a band, a very well-known industrial-sounding kind of punk industrial band called Einstürzen Neubauten from Germany. And you know, I really hope that, okay, here we go, we're going to collaborate, and we're going to have this space be the thing that is the instrument, that it is all this wind, all this kind of like air that is pushing and pumping in is going to make the sound. You know, this had like this was maybe 120 feet by 50 feet by 15 feet, and it had 20 different forms that were moving, and it would push people, and it would lift people, and it would squish people, and it would, you know, always be kind of like you go one way, and then the path you just came down is blocked. But, you know, at no moment was the sound that you heard actually coming from the space. So that was I started making these animations, and this is the first thing that you and I really worked on, Geneva, together. Yeah. So this work is one of my inflatables that Geneva scored, and we're working with feedback here. You know, I was thinking that one way that you could have an inflatable play an instrument is spatially. Like, if we take this microphone and we kept pushing it against the monitor, you know, that's what would make the sound. So this is the instrument, it's playing the space, it's playing the sound. One of the works that last things that we'll show is this, a sort of big disco ball, right? This thing that's constantly collapsing and filling up, and it's dappling the is a kind of theme that we'll come back to. But just before we get into what we've made, I want to present one last work, and this is a work called The Breath Before, which was made for the 2020 edition Alarma Festival, which is a festival in Berlin of experimental jazz and avant-garde electronic music. And I worked with a sound artist there, a DJ who works with field recordings, Miyako Suzuki. We made this work. I'm going to talk a little bit over it here. So it's basically like these three big columns that start off as this kind of like folded sack in the middle of the room, lit, the whole space is dark. We're showing this in the oldest crematorium in Berlin called Silent Green. And these columns, which are maybe 21 feet tall, Miyako has put a... Oh, okay, thank you. So Miyako has put... she's put microphones on each one of the fans, and then processed that input through the computer and manipulated each fan into a tone. And she said, "Wow, Alex, those fans, those are pretty loud. So I'm just going to make what I do bigger than that." Right? So she smashed this wall of like vibration out of these subwoofers at the back of this, and we'll see those in a moment once this piece really gets going. But it's again very, very, very slow. Two of the columns have lights at the top. I wanted the column to sort of like lick the walls with light as it goes up to this domed ceiling, and the third one has a directional speaker, so it shoots sound out in a line, and you can get it to ricochet around a space like a bullet, so that I shoot it towards the ceiling, it might click down and hit you guys, and you'd have no idea where it's coming from. And since this thing is moving, you're getting a little bit of it here, you're getting a little bit of it there, and it's using this space as an instrument as well. You know, that dome becomes part of the instrument. These are just lifting with air. Pressure. So, as we draw to a close, we're going to introduce this new work. This is our newest instrument, and it's called His. We haven't figured out the second word, but it's His Acknowledgement, His Dilution. There are three of these works so they're playing kind of as a chorus. And Geneva, do you want to talk a little bit about how you conceptualize this as an instrument?
Sure. So this is again one of Alex's inflatables, which is really delightful. I think they're all really interesting to watch as dancers, but this one, because I think of the fur and the mirror ball and the height to me is just very delightful. And it's also got a fan, which I was like, well, that's exactly what I've been doing lately. So I thought at first to turn it into an alien harp like the other ones that I did, but alien harps require like a lot of very finicky angles and physics and things like this. And so what I actually have done on the interior of this is build what's kind of a piano board using brass wire strings, and build essentially a small hammer system over the top of that board. So, and then contact mic those wires. So what's happening in real time as the sculpture inflates, the strings start to carry some vibration because of the wind, but then this sort of hammer system over the top of the board starts to also play the strings like a sort of wind-played piano. And then the contact mic picks up those frequencies and translates them to a speaker. And so we tuned it a little bit to our pleasure and to match, but this is sort of what it sounds like as it inflates. And I think when Alex and I were talking about this, we both agreed pretty early on that a sort of diegetic sound shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't sound like what it looks like. Which for me, having been working in a lot of low frequencies, immediately was like, well, I'm not going to do low frequencies for something that's so furry. Otherwise it just adds a bunch of different connotations that I don't think are what's interesting about the work. And to me, this most sort of emotional effect of delight was the thing that I most wanted to pursue. And a kind of toy piano, a kind of dangling, delayed sound, something brighter was definitely more what I wanted to arrive at, which I think we've done.
So I was fortunate enough to be awarded a Pollock Krasner Award this year for this work, for making works along this line, some inflatables that explore this sonic dimension. And to do that, I put a band together. That's what I really wanted to do. In January, in about a month, the band's going to come together and play in Berlin in an exhibition called The Third Thing. The instruments are a disco ball, this fur, and some milk just floating in the air. And artist going by the name of More Mother is going to be playing the disco ball, creating the sound experience that emanates from that. Kame Ayawe is her non-stage name. And then Frank Brettschneider, who is one of the sort of most respected electronic artists from the sort of current, that he's just such a figure in.
I think of him as the man from the Eastern Bloc that plays techno. Like, yeah. That is the one.
Yeah. So he's on the milk. He's playing the milk. There's an augmented ball of milk just in the middle of the space that creates a beat and will tie everything together. And that's, you can see Frank's milk there, there's Kame's disco ball, and then there's Geneva's fur. And this is how they will kind of move in that space. And the milk will always give this pulse, this beat. And then Kame and Geneva's works will come in and play live, just like we heard the fur piece doing in the last video. So if any of you are in Berlin, please come to the show. It opens on January 15th. We look forward to welcoming you, any of you who are there. So thank you all very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
So what's the story?
I'm not sure. I don't remember how we started this.
This was, okay, so you were in Washington,
Right.
and I was sitting in Mary's room in San Francisco, and then we started to talk about all that, like, what in the world we're supposed to be doing if we're artists and we're supposed to be, like, on some level, responsible to the community, right? So, and I think I was recounting the fact that Christine and Mary had started this thing in Nairobi, and so did you. You had this thing. And then we started to talk about this, like trying to figure out, because, you know, I'm going like, what the heck am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to talk about? Right? Go see these people. They're going to be a room full of people. There you are. Just so nice of you. And thank you all for coming. And thank Carrie and everybody else, but I really appreciate it. But trying to figure out, like, at what to deliver, at what level, how to engage you. So we had talked about, like, maybe we should ask you all to go and do something. Maybe it needs to be a document. Maybe we should ask you to, and then it was too complicated. So, because we've done that, right? We've done day in the life, and then if we ask people to do something nice, then it's going to be like, oh, well, I was nice to my dog, I was nice to my grandma, and I took, my neighbor to the grocery store. And then for y'all to be taking pictures on Instagram, I just forget about it. So, what I started to think about was the role of the artist in society, right? And where that leaves us, and what we're supposed to be doing beyond decoration or entertainment. Okay, show the slides. So what we wind up with, what I've been doing for I don't know how many years. Thank you. Excuse me. Sorry. I don't see, if I jump up here, then I can't see the pictures. So what I've been doing for many years is immersing myself with some purpose in the context of society, right? So I started doing this educational stuff. So here's the artist who's solving problems, essentially. Here's the guy who's going and trying to innovate these different levels of education. Are you nervous that I'm breathing on you? No. Oh, okay. So, oh, thank you. Yeah. So, working with these young people that who wants to be in school, right? So now I've got to try to figure out what I can do to use the resources of the community to make their existence make sense to them, and so that it resonates in some way with the community. So I did this TED Talk, and you can look that up. And all of a sudden, it all made sense. So, I'm sorry. So but then also, what else is left, you know? So there's education, and there's our essential needs, like food and water and housing, and that kind of thing. In this case, we do this little project with food, and for like a decade, that's all everybody wanted to eat. So I had to go here and build a garden, I had to go over there and build a garden. So I did this thing called the African American Garden Project, where I took people from the United States and I took them over to Kenya, and I took these Kenyans and I brought them to the United States so they could help people understand what to do with their dirt and how to feed and nourish themselves. And these are people that we took over to Kenya, to the little garden that you saw, or will see, earlier. Educational gardens, like we built them, you know, right there next to the schools. This school, the Wilmot Fraser Elementary School, I can't talk too much, but they stayed open for another 5 years just because the kids were hungry. And that was it. So we just put in the garden and they ate and the test scores went up. And then there's the business with the ancestors, right? Like, who are we? Where do we come from? I did this piece for my Aunt Dora, living in a spirit house. Because everybody's got an auntie or something. Everybody comes from somewhere. I did this piece for my dad. I wanted to do something that people could relate to. Whenever they went into the space, whenever they went into an exhibition space, whenever they went into a gallery, I wanted them to see something that they knew. I wanted them to have something that they could recognize, right? And in these people, the people that migrated from the southern United States to the northern United States, there's that whole legacy of how we wound up here in the first place. So there they are. And they all have pictures in them. The one thing that you'll notice is most, you know, because I take pictures, but the pictures aren't the end. The pictures are the beginning of the conversation, right? So we install the pictures, like I went to Ghana and I took pictures of people, and then I installed them in this antebellum urban plantation. We memorialize the ancestors that had been ignored and forgotten in this plantation. That's a cemetery. There's hundreds of people that were buried in there. Nothing. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going around and I'm talking to people and I'm finding out what the needs are. This one, a home in the homeless. Like, I run around and I encountered these individuals that didn't have a place to stay. So what I did is I photographed them, and I put their pictures in the museum so that they had a place to go when it got cold, right? And, you know, we give them food and housing. Somebody's church burned down in Philadelphia, so I built this thing for, you know, so people would have a place to go to ritualize, to meditate, to have a place where they could think about stuff. And over in northern Kenya, this is interesting, in Turkana, I thought I was going to do a water project. But I wound up talking to these people that live near Lake Turkana. And the thing that you need to understand about Lake Turkana is that Lucy, and I hope you know who that is, where we all come from, comes from about 300 miles from this place. We evolved from here, right? And now what's happening is, and I can't go into the whole thing, but what's happening, that's Lake Turkana. It used to be like, you know, up above the stick. It's disappearing because of, you know, government decisions and, you know, greediness and all that kind of stuff. That's what people have to do to get water, okay? It used to be a river. You know, we used to, you know, wade through the water. Not anymore. This is what people have to do to get food, just to go fishing, right? We had to arm ourselves to get into the boat so we could go out onto the lake. It's nuts. So what's happening is that evolution that I spoke of earlier, these practices, these people's homes, are essentially evolving into obscurity. So for about 30 years, on top of all this other stuff, I've been involved in a conversation with the world. What I'll do is I'll go to these different communities and I talk to people. And I ask them basically the same questions. I'll ask people the same questions in Japan and in Mexico that I do when I'm with the Dogon, or when I'm in Ghana, or in India. And you know, there's some of the questions. Really kind of, you know, not like what's your favorite color, but how does your culture interpret the origin of the universe? In your opinion, what's the relationship between life and death? So everybody gets a chance. The stunning thing about this conversation that I've been having with these people over the past 30 years, the amazing thing is that it sort of hit me one day that everybody was answering the same questions the same way. You know, because I ask about moms and dads, I ask about families, I ask about important people in their lives, and everybody's got one. Everybody's got an Aunt Minnie, everybody's got an Aunt Dora, everybody's got a mom and dad, mostly. So then, that leads us to further, how can we activate communities? How can we activate people around what we're bound to do? Right. What's he talking about now? You can look at these for a while. There was some business that you might see pretty soon. I had to go to, I was invited to go to Calgary to speak with a Native American population that felt as if they weren't heard. So we engaged the population in a dialogue where we used the photographs to put their messages out into the community. The photographs are just the beginning. So how do we solve problems? How do we address our essential needs? How do we continue to make a difference in each other's lives? In light of what's been happening in some of the revelations that have come out, and what's been happening in some of the Native American schools in Canada, some of those photographs become very poignant. Yeah. for some, I don't know, for some reason, I was invited to a small town called Mehretu. It's in Oulu in Finland. People migrate. These are Finnish people. These are Finnish people. They migrated from the equator, because we're talking about migration. They migrated from the equator up through Europe, and every time they want to come in, people are going, keep going. To finally, they've migrated literally, many of them overland from the equator to the Arctic Circle. Because in order to get their papers in Finland, you've got to go to Rovaniemi. Rovaniemi is like at the Arctic Circle, right? So once they're there, they get the papers and now they can work, and they settle in, the next largest community, which is Oulu. Many of the people don't like it. There's an issue with xenophobia. Whenever I first got there, people were being lured up to the to rooftops, and so I started to talk to them, and same business, talking to people, recording the conversations, and then I talked to the other people that had been there in Finland for quite some time, and then I got their words and I got their pictures, and I kind of put them all together in the same place, so that everybody had to go, if they wanted to see their pictures, right? Everybody wants to see their picture. So I had to go, and they all kind of like, got next to each other, and they kind of went into this old building that I found there. And from what I understand, the murder rate just depleted. They just, pictures. Artists, thinking about problems. So what I want you to do at this point is I'd like you to imagine compassion. I want you to think about it. Just imagine compassion. Think of how that happens. Remember compassion. At some point, somebody did something with you or for you. And finally, with those memories, finally recalling those things, I'm asking you to then inspire compassion. So now here's the artist coming to you, activating the community. Inspire compassion. So some of you got this little due date. There's supposed to be 50 of them. I'm overwhelmed at the number of people that have shown up. So the idea is that there's 50 acts of compassion, right? Because 50 of you will go and do something. Because beyond understanding that we all have a common ancestor, beyond understanding that we all come from the same place and we all need the same things, that's all fine that we understand all of these things, right? And this is the business that I've been working with and wrestling with, you know, for decades. We can understand it, but what are we going to do about it? Here's an opportunity to do something about it. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Carrie.
His daughter, Mary, and one friend.
Thank you.
I met Lonnie called asking if I might be interested in doing the project. Many, many, many years ago, and the moment we met, from the moment he picked me up at the airport in Pittsburgh, right at Manchester, Craftsman's Guild, another extraordinary house in the United States, I knew that we would be dear friends, and I've watched him, I've watched this work, I've watched the importance of the work, I've watched his words, I've watched the writing, I've watched the integrity, I've watched the ingenuity, I've watched the passion, I've watched the grace simply grow and grow and grow and grow. And then I watched Mary come out and speak. So these ideas that you bring, Lonnie, I'm so grateful to you for the work you do. I called my mother one morning, and I asked her about the meaning of grace, because I was struggling with the meaning. What does that mean? And it was a great conversation, one of the great conversations that I had with my mother. One of the things that she said was that, she said, I know that it has to do with compassion. And an unconditional love. If you start from that and you can work into the thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you.
Wonderful. Every once in a while, the world gets lucky. Not only has an extraordinary mother, but an amazing daughter walking in her footsteps. I've known Aggie, Miss Gunn, which is what I used to call her, Miss Gunn. And then it was Miss Aggie. For many, 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 many years, and I've just known about this extraordinary woman for so long, all of the great work, all of the important work that she has done over the years. And watching it, just watching it grow, watching it shift and change and deepen in all these sort of extraordinary ways, until, a few years ago when she decided that, that this thing around mass incarceration was enormous and enormously important and something that we really needed to pay attention to, and something that she believed that if we sort of put our muscle and our minds and our hearts and our compassion and our grace behind it, that maybe we could shift the needle just a bit. And so to my queen, my mother of the arts and activism and philanthropy, Miss Aggie Gunn, I thank you and I bow. I thank you and I bow. I thank you and I bow. Because I think it's really important, you know, and you know, again, this sort of, everywhere I go today, I'm dashing all over the building, from one end of the building to the next, listening to all these artists, again, who are trying to get as close to the bone as possible in terms of telling some kind of truth, their truth, in relationship to the moment in which we live. And so we're here again, not only with Aggie, but with Catherine, her daughter, who is continuing to do extraordinary work in film, primarily, but they've also joined together to have a foundation, the Art for Justice Fund, which focuses primarily on the devastation that has been caused by mass incarceration. And they're going to talk to you for the next, about that.
Thank you, Carrie. I feel like just running around the building all day listening to you. I think we all want to listen to you, and listening is so much a part of the shifting that you're talking about and what keeps us all alive and active and present in a change. You know, I was sitting in your space over there reflecting on change and realizing that we are not the resistance. The resistance is the people who will not change, and we are trying to change. So that I get from listening to you. I'm going to ask Aggie a few questions. We're going to just play this by ear because there's a, you know, it's memory and history. It's like age, it's not a repository. Aggie is as you know, our elders among us are as dynamic and contributive and emergent as all of us. You are. And we're going to see how that looks right now. And, you know, one of the beautiful things about getting to work on the documentary that Aggie and I made together was really getting to celebrate the phases of being human, the phases of knowledge, the phases of shifting and changing. And one of my favorite parts was that my children were some of her interlocutors, and that there is this sort of generational exchange that goes in both directions. So I'm really grateful to Carrie for this environment and this stage and inviting us. And I'm also grateful to Aggie for joining me here. So do you want to say a few words about Carrie?
Okay. I'd like to thank you, Catherine, and thank you for everything you've done to bring this about. I'd like to honor my friend Carrie Mae Weems, an artist and a person who I greatly admire and have been lucky enough to know for quite some time. Over more than 3 decades, Carrie has developed a body of work that stuns and stimulates us with its narrative power, its knowledge about life, its perceptions and suggestions, its insight into history and the contemporary happenings. Carrie has long been active in social justice causes. In Syracuse, Carrie created art programs for public school children, addressing poverty, and she has used art to fight against violence. Her recent project, Resist COVID Take 66, shined a light on how COVID-19 disproportionately affects Black and brown communities. And now with The Shape of Things, we see contemporary American political life and culture through Carrie's powerful lens. And that's in the other room, and it's a wonderful space that she's created there. I admire Carrie's continued desire for social awareness and racial parity. Carrie is emphatic, intrepid, engaged, inquiring, unbounded, bold in life as in art. Thank you, Carrie, and the Park Avenue Armory for bringing together an extraordinary group of people and inviting us to join you in this journey.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
If you will turn your eyes to the monitors, I think there's someone in here who is going to be able to play the trailer to the Aggie film. Is that possible? Oh, good. Excellent. We can't see it. This is a really important part, but I can tell you what she says. We can start it over.
Yeah?
There we go.
What do you think of the movie? I think the movie is great. Which movie are you talking about?
Renowned philanthropist and art collector Aggie Gunn stunned the art world when she sold Masterpiece by Roy Lichtenstein for $165 million in July and used the proceeds to start the Art for Justice Fund to combat mass incarceration.
We went to San Quentin. I had people come up to me and say, what in the world did you want to do that for? I think the case that struck me most was that of Eric Garner in that I Can't Breathe. I remember after he died, I just kept dreaming, I can't breathe.
Aggie understands that art makes it possible for us to have empathy, and that without empathy, there is no justice.
You have conjoined these two things, justice working through the arts.
I think of you as sort of the ultimate empath. You're somebody who really feels other people.
Oh, that's wonderful.
She laid bare wealth and privilege. Most people who have it pretend like they don't have it. And she said, I have this, and I want it to go to work. I want it to be so much bigger than one painting.
So I made questions today.
Why do you collect?
Have you ever cried in front of an artwork?
Do you want any of your grandchildren to be artists?
What is love?
Were you close with your mother?
Why aren't you a typical lady from Ohio?
How many of these conversations have you done?
What do you think you're going to do when you're grown up?
The giant question of life.
I heard you had sex with every artist that you collect. Is that true?
Wouldn't that have been fun?
Okay.
I don't know what you're laughing at.
I know, because you say, wouldn't that have been fun, instead of, oh, Jack, stop, which is normally how you would have responded. Would have been fun. The film starts actually with another moment of us in the taxi, and I ask Aggie what she hopes for the film, and she says, after a long pause, I just hope not too many people see it. So that is actually leads to my next question to you. Or first, I want to acknowledge and thank and recognize my wonderful producing partner, Tanya Selvaratnam, who produced the film. And, but my question to you now is sort of, why did you do the film? If you're glad you did, if you're glad that people have seen it, and to sort of channel a little bit of Carrie's terminology, were you hopeful when you made the film? What did you hope the film would do?
Well, I did hope the film would service the thing we were most interested in, or I was A for J, Art for Justice, because I really realized, and I realized more throughout the years we've spent with the money, or the lack of money now, but the money that has been spent on things that we cared about. I really wanted to see it culminate in what I hoped would be the overthrow of Rikers and closing of Rikers, and then after that, you know, a lot less people going to prison that were not convicted of anything and were not found guilty of anything, but couldn't pay the price of the bail. And so that's what, as you know, I was a reluctant person to do this, but part of what convinced me to overcome my own discomfort, in addition to my confidence in you, was my hope that the film would create visibility for A4J, engage new donors in the fund, which we have one here in the audience who has been very, very generous to us, and many new people about the scourge of mass incarceration. Well, somehow, thanks to Catherine and her team at Auburn Pictures, the film Aggie managed to fulfill these goals and exceed my expectations. A4J artists and advocate grantee partners were featured prominently at Aggie screenings and talkbacks in Sundance, LA, and New York City, and other places to bring the message this film conveys. Art and justice in concert can help end mass incarceration. The film also helped bring the model of selling art to create justice, turning swords into plowshares. That's a quote. I didn't make it to many people, and perhaps inspired others, such as the brilliant Julie Mehretu, to donate most generously, and she has been fabulous. She really has been great, as have other people, but with much smaller amounts of Julie was really a big number, and engaged so much to this. And it is in no smart part due to Julie's extraordinary gift of A4J that the fund is now able to extend itself for a 6th year of grant making. So I'm really happy about that. And one thing I forgot to say is the night that Ava DuVernay's...
Wait, we're going to come back to that. Is that okay?
Okay.
You're gonna, okay.
Okay.
We do want to say so many things in a short period of time, and we're going to come back a little bit to the 6th year. But I wanted to first just say, as you pointed out, Julie or Tanya and me and you and so many people who are working to end mass incarceration, to invest in the imagination, to imagine a world without prisons and jails, that there are many different paths and many different ways to do that. And I'm wondering, as a philanthropist, how you engage with the current moment as an example maybe to other people to think about how they do, because people come from so many different places to do it.
Well, I would like to quote Brian Stevenson first, and he has spoken at many things that I've been at and Catherine has been at, but the thing that he always says is getting proximate is what you need to do with people that you want to change their minds or change their attitudes. And well, Brian Stevenson knows that I'm supporting and making a point to visit people directly, to listen and learn. And going to Rikers is one of the examples that we've had, that you can't know what somebody else is suffering or what happens to people unless you get close to them. Moving funds quickly so that they can get to the people doing the work. Well, it's harder today than when it was a small team. Writing a check, A4J has moved over $92 million to over 250 individuals and organizations in 4 short years. Not too bad.
I'm also the artisan advocate. That's good. I don't want us to run out of time. We have a few more things we want to talk about, and I want to show one other clip that people haven't seen. But I do want to, here's for the next thing. But I do want to just say the 6th year was really brought on. Aggie started the whole fund and immediately turned to her own community, to other people, other collectors, other people in the art world, and asked them to join her. 30 different individuals and couples did join at that point, and then through a long story of how Mark Bradford met some of the artists that were Art for Justice grantee partners, he decided to sell an edition and to contribute all of that money to Art for Justice. And he did that, and the gallery didn't take any money, he didn't take any money, and Art for Justice doesn't take any money because of the generosity of the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropies. So every dollar that everyone gives to Art for Justice goes right out. And then other artists joined. There are a lot of artists, I'm not going to be able to list them all right now, but there are many, many artists, including Julie and Mark Bradford, and it's been incredible to have the artists contribute because they felt so connected to the goals of the fund and to step in. And we've 100 million, so we've given 20 million a year. We're almost done. We have about 6 months left on our 5th year, and because of the generosity of other donors, we have over 25 million already for the 6th year. Which is just incredible because it's allowing us, we've been as a catalytic time-based fund that ends after 5 years, we have to be careful of not setting people up to hire lots of staff and then there's no funding for them the next year. So we've been very intentional about how we work with our grantee partners to make sure that the funding is in place for them to continue the work and to imagine the work that they want to do. And it does allow us, given this moment, that nobody was expecting a 6th year, to actually be able to really lean into something very different, which we're calling New Visions for Shared Safety. And for us, that has emerged, as the movement has emerged, to really reflect imagining abolition and what that means, and to not be scared of the term or the notion, and to actually use it as an opportunity to imagine the notion. And as our dear friend Lisa Jessie Peterson, well, you'll see it in the clip, so I'm not going to say it. But so Aggie, how I was going to set up what you wanted to say, I guess you can just say it.
But, well, with the greatest report that we've gotten, we've partnered with the Mellon Foundation.
No, this one. Because, I mean, we can talk about that, but we don't have a lot of time. So if you talk about...
Let me just finish this.
Okay.
We partnered with the Mellon Foundation to expand the Right of Return Fellowship Program, which we've been talking about, by two artists, Jesse Crimes and Russell Craig, that many of you may know. This program is not giving artists the support they need to sustain their individual practice, but also building a community of formerly incarcerated artists bound by a common person called the chosen family. And I think that's a very important part of it.
Well, and that's also important because it's an example of one of the legacies of Art for Justice, because as we do end in a year and a half, we want to be sure that, you know, that this whole zeitgeist moment, that there are ways for people to continue the work. And Jesse Crimes and Russell Craig have been art grantee partners since the beginning. They're the people that Mark Bradford met and that turned him on to Art for Justice, and they're carrying on with this fund for formerly incarcerated artists.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about In the Exception?
Many of you may be aware, particularly if you saw Catherine's documentary, I was moved to launch the A for J after watching Ava DuVernay's film, 13th. 13th makes the case that while the 13th Amendment adopted in 1865 did abolish slavery and ended involuntary servitude, it created an exception for those convicted of a crime. This exception has fueled systematic racial discrimination in this country and helped to create the crisis of mass incarceration we have today. Several of the A4J grantee partners, lawyers, organizers, artists have, with A4J support, come together to launch a new campaign that will ask, did you know slavery is still legal according to the Constitution? If one is charged with a crime, it will advocate for legislation change to ban the exception and create public awareness that suggests it's time for America to put an end to its long history of slavery and involuntary servitude once and for all. let's end the exception of the 13th Amendment. Given how Ava J. began, I am excited to support this campaign and hope you consider joining me. Thank you.
And so to end, I just want to say there are two grantee partners, Norris Henderson in Louisiana, who started VOTE, which is the Voices of the Experienced, and Lisa Jessie Peterson. And she went to do her piece, The Peculiar Patriot, to perform it in Angola, which is a prison plantation. It's a prison on a plantation in New Orleans. She went to perform that. I'm going to show a 1-minute little sizzle reel, but we made a short film because when she went down to do that, they knew what the performance was, but because of the men's strong response, the amount of hope that it created in them, the fact that they felt seen, the fact that they could hear that someone on the outside saw them and knew what they were going through, the COs locked it down and shut down the performance halfway through. And to me, that's really about art, pushing the edges of control. The prison is the ultimate symbol and reality of control. And they shut it down because they saw that there was something puncturing, something ventilating that system. And so we made this short film. It'll be done in a month or something. But here's 1 minute from that, and then I think we're out of time, sadly. But I do want to say one thing about it afterwards. Can we see this is called The Peculiar Silence. It's going to be a 25-minute film. It's directed by Cinque Northern. I'm the producer.
If this was your last time to be able to address, after you said this, there would be nothing else anymore for you to say. What would be the last thing you would say?
The first thing that came to mind was the ancestor Harriet Tubman. And I would remind everyone that Harriet Tubman, she was born into slavery. That's all she knew. But she saw something bigger. So just because you see prison with your physical eyes, what do you see beyond that? So we have an obligation to continue the legacy and the envisioning that Harriet Tubman did. Because if she could see freedom when all she saw was plantation and slave life, then we can envision a life and a world without mass incarceration.
So what happens at the end of this film, once it got locked down and they weren't allowed to finish, the men got on various phones. They either called their wives or they used their phones. People tracked down Lisa and called to talk to her and tell her what it meant to them and to have a connection. And so we actually in the film have a lot of recordings. We've had actors, some famous actors too, who have offered to re-record what the men said so that their voices can help the voices of the men inside be heard, because we can't have the men's voices inside. Obviously, they're on whatever flip phones and that they're not supposed to have, and it would put too much danger to them. So they call, and the end of our film is some of the things that the men are saying to her about what it meant. And I just want to end with the last thing that one of the men says. He says, I don't want to get out of prison. I want to be free. He says, people in here say, I can't wait to get out. But I don't want to get out of prison. I want to be free. So that's the abolition that we're going for with Art for Justice. And now we have a little advertisement from Tanya. You want to come up? Blue girl right on the side of the box. And you don't have to know anything about art to play this game, and it's like the movie. It's like how you can see change and you can see the world through art, and it doesn't have to look like journalism. Sorry, journalism. You can buy anywhere. It was published by Penguin Random House. It's available at all bookstores.
On the Free People website where I bought my jumpsuit in the wellness center.
It's at the MoMA store, it's at the bookstores, it's at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. That was a good party. Let's go. Oh, and questions.
Just one tiny question. Thank you so much for that. How do you measure? How do you measure the success of your project? Right? How do you? Art for Justice. I mean, and I'm sort of asking this not only to you, but I'm also sort of asking it to the room, to people that are working in certain kind of ways, have been working in certain kinds of ways for a long time. Like, how do you know that you're being effective, or that you're moving the needle? And, right? I mean, it's such a bear, it's such a mountain, right? And so, of course, every little bit helps. But I'm wondering how you, both of you, sort of understand that in relationship to the work that you are doing together as mother and daughter in Art for Justice.
It's such a big question, and I like that you posed it also to everyone else. So we can all think about it together, but I think as artists and people who do see the world through art, that we know that things are very hard to quantify, that they're easier to qualify, to talk about the effects they have on us emotionally. I always come back to Brian Stevenson too, who says, you know, that policy change is downstream from cultural change and downstream from narrative, that it's downstream from narrative, that you could change. You know, Brown versus Board of Education allowed kids to go to school or to go to school with kids of other races, but it didn't end racism. Only cultural change, only narrative change, only all of us learning and believing and understanding what equality or abolition might look like. That's the only way to do that. And so I do believe that art is what's going to change it. I think that the sweet spot for Art for Justice is that it puts the two together. It doesn't ever say that there's the philanthropist here and the organizer here and the artist here, but that actually all of us are all of those things. And I think that when we recognize that, our movement is so much more powerful, because you can't sustain it otherwise. You can't just have one or two of those things, and you can't silo those parts of ourselves, because then we're not actually bringing the force of what would be a narrative change. And I think that when it comes together, the example, I was excited Aggie was talking about, the end the exception. You know, I assume most people in this room knew that the Bill of, you know, the Constitution says that slavery is okay if you do a crime according to their definition. That means slavery is not outlawed. And we can say that people have been saying, they're brilliant organizers and activists have been saying abolition for a long time. We do not need prisons. But it's only now that people are starting to put it together and say, oh, we're going to actually create legislation and bring amendments to change the Constitution at the same time that we have Clyde's on Broadway, at the same time that we have Russell and Jesse's images, at the same time that the abstraction in Julie's art is able to penetrate and function in the way where some people see it and they'll get a feeling. I just think, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer. I guess I'm just, do you have other ideas?
But I have other ideas when you said all that. I don't have ideas.
You have a lot of really good ideas. What I like, though, is that Aggie functions. She has educated the intuition, as a good friend of mine likes to say, that she responds to her gut. She came out and she said, she didn't sit there and say, I'm going to do a report, I'm going to do an evaluation, I'm going to see what other philanthropists, la 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 la. She came out and said, I have to do this alchemy. I'm going to turn this painting, by my intention, I'm going to turn a painting into the end of mass incarceration. Wow. And you did. You wanted to do that. It will, and stop saying it.
Well,
Go ahead.
And I know that you're finally working on a project with Claudia Rankine, who's here.
Who is here too.
What's that project?
Do you want to say? No. I'm going to say it's in process, so I'm not going to say too much about it. I'm going to say two key things. It is a sizzler. We're working on that. Our sizzler right now is about 15 minutes long, which is not a sizzle, it's a slow burn. But we really are trying to look at the current moment and what it is to live in this world of white supremacy, that we are all in this world of white supremacy, and that racism, violence. There's so many things that can go wrong anytime and anywhere, but they're not going wrong. The racism, the violence, the horrors are not all the time everywhere. And how do we live in this liminal space where a risk to life is a risk to living? So we're not talking about the moment of state-sanctioned violence. We're not talking about the moment of the killings. We're not looking at the violence in those moments. We're actually looking at the meanwhile, and that's the title of the film. So stay tuned for another year, and we'll have something. Did I do okay, or do you want to say more? It's the first time that Claudia's indelible work of text and image and a dialogue between them is being put into film. So it's Claudia's narration, and we're partnering with Homi Bhabha from Harvard, who many may know. And Erica Dilday is producing. And it'll be a feature, sort of more meditative, not like a documentary like you've ever seen before. It'll be something brand new, but thank you for asking about that.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Aggie. Thank you, Catherine. I feel like Oprah. It comes out from the depths and from the deep. From the deep. It's like Bill T. Jones's Deep Blue Sea. I heard Fred. I called him up on the phone, asked him if he might consider participating, knowing how busy he is, teaching, working. And he just said yes. So I'm deeply grateful. I'm grateful for the friendship that we are developing. I'm grateful for the sound of his voice. It sounds like I've heard it all my life. So thank you. Claudia Rankine and Helga Davis are next.
Good evening. It's a mournful week for all of us with the passing of Greg. And I thank Fred for bringing his spirit into this room so that we can keep our worlds in one place. Fred said that in one of his amazing pieces, he used the phrase seeing with and seeing through to what it represents. And so Helga Davis is going to perform a piece that we wrote about a Titian painting so that you can see with and see through to what it represents. And then Helga, the amazing Helga Davis, who I've known since college, will read a piece of her own. So join me in welcoming Helga Davis.
Among the Undressed by Claudia Rankine. Stepping into the painting, backing up a moment to its edge. Any further, we'd fall out of the picture. Yes? Ready? Stepping into the painting, backing up a moment to its edge. Any further, we'd fall out of the picture. We encounter her. Black woman, be she enslaved or what? Of all the women here, she alone dressed in white and orange stripes, partially draped in full consciousness of her object, the chaste goddess, yet and always still naked in the structures of thought that fix us. We see her clothing the chaste goddess, or Since we might as well embrace the goddess's outsized mythic powers, I would go so far as to say we see her shielding the metaphorically winged goddess, who, despite her proximate, fleshy positioning, dominates in the crash between gods and mortals. We see her, be she enslaved or what, her dress slipping, rushed into service, her gaze caught by Actaeon, who stands before her caught in the myth. Dear, dear Actaeon, you have stumbled into that which you created, your pillaging glance. You have stumbled into, and we must be careful here not to underestimate the violence you are, white and male. You have stumbled into the painted poem, lit from the left. Try to see yourself. Throw your reflection back through the impoverishment of history. Under these circumstances, given our circumstances, Actaeon, whatever you might think of your coming state, bullish, metamorphosis, stag, does not destroy your authority, your potential power to come furiously. It is, after all, your dogs who ultimately destroy you. Whether we are addressing you, Actaeon, or not, the goddess knows. She knows, and as clearly as anyone before or since, the black woman, be she enslaved or what, sees. She sees, has seen, has learned, has lived our collective history of being raped, whether we are approached by you, Actaeon, or not. Between the goddess and her nymphs bathing in the sacred grotto lives the premise of chastity, even as the nymphs flirt in their eloquent poses. I do not doubt that we must have refinement, or is it confinement, in the picture, at the same time that we recognize that history has made peace with. This classical representation, the displacement of a vagina by a face, remains living as far as we, the black woman, be she enslaved or what, can see. And is it only that one face reflects back to us what a human being is not? In X-rays of the painting, layers of light reveal the black woman, be she enslaved or what, naked or otherwise, is not original to the picture, but rather arrived as a substitute shade onto the body of a white woman in an effort perhaps to normalize unthinkable acts, unspeakable practices. Why is the dog there at the feet of the black woman? Be she enslaved or what? Oh, Titian, Titian, Titian. The women cannot truly merge, not even here in your depiction of the moment of passage between the human and the non-human world. I don't wish to be unfair. I am interested primarily in life, living, barely registered, rarely measured, regarding the black woman, be she enslaved or what, be she X-rayed or not. I believe that you who see understand what I am describing. Certain dynamics are by no means limited to Titian's 16th century rendering. I do not think I exaggerate the living conditions out of which our being becomes our seeing. All this nakedness stuns in its ritual repetition of loss of control over beauty, our bodies, all this nakedness. Under these conditions of seeing, the fact that the black woman, be I enslaved or what, appears addressed undresses me. The fact that Titian addresses me does not redress me. The painting draws from what violence Titian allowed himself to see, thus fating us all to be seen, seeing. See? It is no use trying to erase the violence in the painting, no use trying to disprove it is what it is. It is. But I give you this. Given the violence insulates itself quite differently depending on who sees, go. And say what you have seen, if you can. No, it's not what I'm doing. I'm not avoiding. I'm just aware of a strange inability to keep track of time and going from my bed to the floor, to the chair, to the couch, to the kitchen, to the sink, to the chair, to the couch, to the chair, to the couch, to the kitchen, to the sink, to the chair, to the couch, to the chair, to the couch, to the chair, to the couch, to look out of the window, but never back to the bed. Once I'm out of the bed, I'm out of the bed. And then to the floor, to the chair, to the kitchen, to the couch, to look out of the window, to the chair, to the couch, still on the couch, to the kitchen, to the sink with the teapot, to the chair, to the couch, to look out of the window, to the kitchen, to turn off the teapot, to the cabinet and the tea, to the cup and the chair, to the toilet for a second, to the chair dough, forgot the cookie, to the couch, to the couch, to the table, to the table, to the chair, to the chair, to the couch, to the window, to the bathroom, to the mirror, yes, the mirror, to the couch, to the window, to the kitchen, to the stove, to the tea kettle, to the chair, 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 to the toilet, to the mirror, and the sink. Of course, the sink. What do you think I am? Some kind of couch. To the chair, to the computer, finally, the computer, 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 to the window, to the couch, to the window, to the window. Was that the phone? To the chair, to the phone, not the phone, to the kitchen, to the refrigerator, to the stove, to the couch, to the windowsill, to the window, to the kitchen, to the sink, to the toilet, to the mirror, yes, the mirror, to the sink, lest you think, the chair, to the chair, to the chair, to the window, to the sink, to the mirror, yes, the mirror, to the toilet, yes, again, to the sink, fuck the mirror, to the chair, to the chair, to the chair, to the computer, to the computer, to the computer, to the computer, to the couch, to the window, to the couch, to the page, to the page, to the page, to the page, to the window, to the page, to the computer, to the computer, to the window, to the couch, never left, to the computer, on the couch, to the window, to the window, to the page, 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 to the mirror, yes, the mirror, yes, the mirror, yes, the mirror, yes, the mirror, yes. Thank you.
On the count of 3, could everyone say their name? 1, 2, 3. It's really wonderful to meet you. I'm grateful that you all are here on such a spectacular evening. I am going to make poems in the emancipatory spirit of deep love. This chair is for you. I'm going to make 5 poems for people. You begin deciding right now in this moment if you are going to be a person who will come this way behind the television, to come up the stairs and take a seat in this chair. In time, when you arrive to this space, you can shift it so that I can look at you and we can look at each other. I'm going to ask you for a series of ingredients. And then we will share, and I will make a poem for you. Bye. Could you close the door? No, you can't, can you? Sorry. It's so funny how fast that comes up in me. Thank you, Belinda. So you'll come up, I'll ask you for a series of ingredients, and then I'll make the poem for you. If somebody's here with you, you can have somebody in the audience record the poem, record the moment, or you can bring your phone up here with you, and you can record audio or video. That's if you feel that that's something that you want to have captured. I won't remember what happens, so the moment belongs to you. So now, in the ever-expansive spirit of emancipatory love and infinite grace, that which is owned deeply in the birthright of our breath by each and every one of us in this human body and beyond this human body into the cosmos that initiated our very consciousness here. We are awake and alive and alight in this moment, in the power and the technology of our loving souls. Who would like to be the first person? Thank you, love. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
That's good. What's your name?
Scott Alves Barton.
I'm going to ask you to repeat it 2 more times. Would you take a deep breath, please?
Scott Alves Barton. Scott
Alves Barton. Yes, thank you. Did you know that you wanted to be the first person to come up?
Not inherently.
Thank you for being the first person to come up.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for moving with what moves you.
I try.
Sometimes it takes effort, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In this world, it does. I'm going to make a poem for you in the spirit of emancipatory love and infinite grace, that which is our birthright. I'm going to ask you for 3 ingredients. Listen to them, feel them, and speak your answers for these ingredients when it feels right to you. Please give yourself permission to only say what feels right. Yes?
Yes, I give myself permission.
Yes. Right. The first thing that we need is a name. It can be any name. It can be your name. It does not have to be your name, but it should be a name that calls to you, rises up within you, and it should feel right to be spoken out loud in this moment, Scott. The next thing that we need is a color. Any color, it should feel right to be spoken out loud in this moment. And the next thing that we need is a power. By dint of this moment happening, you have the capacity within your ever-expanding heart, within the universe of love that is your birthright, inside of your breath, to bring forth a transaction from this moment that will exact in that which you decide. By dint of this moment happening, you choose something else to happen. So we need a name, we need a color, and we need a purpose. Could you touch my hand for a moment, please? Thank you.
Okay. Sylvia.
Sylvia.
Vermilion.
Vermilion.
Mercy.
Yes, love. Scott, is there anything else that you would like to say before we begin?
I miss my mother.
One more time, please.
I miss my mother.
Yes, love. Sylvia, Vermilion, and Mercy. Here in the round, and the robust, and the ever-expanding and pulsing, bounding in the beating heart of the entire electric universe is the rising sun of Sylvia's love eyes. The first time that she set eyes on you, she swore to God it was the color vermilion coming through to her. For the very first time in a cascade of light, she laid her eyes upon your sight and said, yes, this is the reason I became a bell in this life, to ring you into the light of your very own being, which is how love works on this railroad card of life. Everything and every moment from this moment to the next, everything and every moment from this moment to the next, everything and every moment from this moment to the next, it rises and it swirls like a kiss upon your merciful neck. May you move forward from the sidewalk to the concrete, to the asphalt, to the subway, to the trails and to the rails and to the electric bells that ring the sound of your own soul to your own self, rising in the dawn with the portrait of your own face upon the ceiling of your grace, that you might know within the bell of your very own song that this moment and this life, this ringing, bringing life, this infinitely luminous, miraculous day that is alive inside of the saxophone of your being is the medicine and the magic that we all be needing. A little bit more mercy, please. Jesus, please, just a lifting up of the grief, turn it into a kite, Scott, like a little boy. You might run through a meadow and sing your song soul, sing your song soul, being song soul, Sylvia's song soul, sun. Ringing upon the horizon of your own breath, we say, yes and yes and yes and yes and yes and yes and yes. Who is this? I cannot see you. I know. Could you come up here? Do you feel like you're in trouble? I just want to touch you. Hi. Love you too. I love you. Hi, love. Hello. How are you?
Great.
How do you feel today? Do you?
Fancy.
Yes. Yes. We want to know if you have a song inside of you.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yes.
Fancy, yes.
It's something. I'm going to ask you the same question again at the end. Okay? So we need 3 things. Here comes somebody trying to surreptitiously crawl onto the stage.
Oh.
We didn't. It just was magic. It didn't happen. The mic just shifted over. We need a name.
My name is Meron Medhane.
Would you take a deep breath, please?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ask you to repeat your name 2 more times, please.
I'm going to change it up. I'm going to add my middle name.
Yes.
Meron Skeen Medhane.
Yes.
Meron Skeen Medhane.
One more time, please.
Meron Skeen Medhane.
We need 3 ingredients: a name, a color, and a purpose. You witnessed what happened before, so you can find within yourself. Wait, could you hold on for a moment? Just look at me.
Okay.
Here. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for coming up here. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for your life.
So name.
It's a name.
Color.
Yeah. A name, any name.
Okay.
It should feel right to you to say. And a color.
Mm-hmm.
It should feel right to you to say. And a purpose. By dint of this moment happening, you call to your reserves, to the power, to the technology of your living being in this moment with everything that is available to you to make anything that you want come from this, to bring anything forth. So it's a name, a color, and a purpose.
So the name is Aboy.
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 Could you spell it for me?
Aboy. It actually
Aboy.
means father in Tigrinya.
Yes.
For color, I'm going to cloud. I don't know if that's
good.
Okay,
that's good.
cloud.
Yes. Yes.
Both expansion and courage is coming up for me.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Rhythm love. Rhythm love, powerful love, to the tip-tap, to the grasp of hands that hold you, lift you, throw you, bloom you up into the sky like a fury of clouds, spreading wide and spitting forth only rainbows, hearts, moonbeams, love-like things that might glitter down upon the face of a girl child being illuminated by the gaze of boy, this father who comes with a song up his soul, and each and every one of his lungs becomes you inside of each and every one of his lungs, the way that a womb knows what to do because the lungs send forth a song, this same blooming ocean of love like rhythm, tip-tap, something about a piano, something about making a dance, something about looking up into the sky, something about your rib bones becoming an instrument, something about falling in love with the sound of your own feet walking on the rooms of your home. Something about a river being ancient, something about a river being a river, being a river, being a river of rhythm, being a river of rhythm, being a river of rhythm, come to call you home into the power of each and every single one one of your magnificent digits. This song, this song, this song! He says, for the soul and for the truth and for the light, for the brilliant and bright rightness that is right with you and right within you, right as you are, and right as you are made and meant to do and be and see and say and go and flow and rise to know the roar and go of your whole self, whole. Even though they tremble, show me your hands. I will show you a miracle and a masterpiece, a map to trace the path back to the sea that is rising and breathing within you, breeding forth an entire cosmos of stars. May you be unchained from anything here on this structured earth that has tried to claim the expansive horizon of your breath, your ideas, your light, your life, your love, anything that ever came to tangle up the feet of your dance, to lay a house upon the meadow of your tongue. May it see its own self as undone and gasp in the surprise of its uselessness. May you know the courage of your entire being this very instant as you wink and as you blink and as you weep tears from the sink of your eyes. May you know that you were born to surprise us all. In the sight of your own beauty, we might see ourselves as free as we were meant to be, this guided, luminous, healing thing. I see you alive inside of the rhythm of your own feet, a boy in the clouds of stars that ring forth exactly what you are. I could point your face up to the heavens and say, see, look, look, there you are. You came all of this way to live in the house of your own shine, yes. What is yours? And what is mine? That is not ours and is not the holiest truth of our own holiness. This is our freedom song. This is the land that our courage walks upon, and all of it is inside of the rhythm, every single cell of your body and every single step that you might take, breaking and breaking and breaking any chain that comes to claim the emancipatory horizons of your own magnificently muscular human heart.
How are you? I'm doing well. Wonderful.
Why did you come up here?
I don't know, I just wanted to, I guess, have the experience and to commemorate perhaps the memory of my grandmother, whom I lost, it will be a year, December 13th.
Yes.
And she was my best friend.
Yes, 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 yes. Could you do me a favor? Mm-hmm. Could you actually scoot this way a little bit in your chair? Like move the chair a little bit.
Oh, there we go. Good?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So you're ready for this moment right now, yes?
Yes. I'm here.
Okay. And then, okay, so I'm going to ask you something.
Okay.
Hold on one second. Yes. Is there a song inside of you? Okay. So I want you to think about something. I'm going to ask you something, but don't respond to it out loud. Respond to it inside of yourself.
Okay.
Okay? What do you need from this moment? And you're allowed to need something and want something from this moment. What do you need or want from this moment? And you hold that inside of you. Okay?
Okay.
All right. What's your name?
Tanisha Jackson.
Hey, Tanisha, what's up? Do we know each other? Have we ever met before?
No.
We're so lucky to meet each other today. Oh my gosh.
I know, right?
It's like super climate changey outside and everything. And
Right.
it's like a memorable December in a memorable place in a memorable room with memorable faces. So we need, your nails are a really fun color.
Oh, thank you.
We need a name, a color, and a purpose.
Okay.
And the name can be any name that should feel right to you. It can be your name, it can be anybody's name. And the color should be a name that rises up inside of you and it should feel right to be said out loud. And the purpose, you think by dint of this moment happening, it can make anything else that you choose or you want to happen. Yes.
So, Annetta Avery.
Annetta Avery.
Purple. And wisdom.
Okay. And can you tell me where Annetta Avery was born?
Sedalia, Missouri.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you one more time, could you repeat the name, the color, and the purpose, please?
Annetta Avery.
Yes.
Purple. Wisdom.
Okay, thank you. So I'm being drawn to your heart, to a sound inside of your heart, like a beating drum, like somebody patting you on your heart or on your chest, so there's a rhythm to it, like being soothed. That's what I hear first. Okay? Okay, yes, okay. Okay, all right. So we are also feeling and recognizing a lot of All right, Annetta Avery, purple, and wisdom. The wisdom is the dance, yes. The wisdom is to pick up your feet and find a groove to move you through the day, a magical, powerful prowess of song, of dance, of rhythm, of chants, of light, of movement, of you choose how you want to groove through this day. The wisdom is something like a dance. The wisdom is something like a dance calling forth from the breath, from the light, from the brown and wise eyes of a woman who gazes upon you in this very instant. The gaze is inside of the center of your chest. It is a sound. It is a heartbeat. It is a luminous rhythm that wants to come and rise and tap dance out from inside of you. Here is how the power of love moves. All of the love that was ever loved inside of you is still within you in this very instant. It is a thing that can be harnessed. Imagine that your love is a train of horses and you could guide it forth and move it to touch upon anything. Is what is being asked of you is to do something with all of the loving that has been put inside of you. Imagining then an entire field of cotton, only the cotton ain't white, it is the color purple. Imagine then you and Annetta Avery meeting each other's gaze through this field of purple cotton, not at all a maze, a directed high line of life, a highway that leads you right to each other. Only when you embrace, you become one another's sounds. You become the sounds of your own heartbeat, carrying Annetta Avery's heartbeat inside of your heartbeat. There is a rhythm and a music and a sound that goes around and around and around. It is climbing up the spire of your DNA this very instant. It is knocking at the window behind your eyes. You are being tasked to do something real and alive with all of the love that has been invested into your life. You are being asked to rise to the occasion of your very own breath in a new way. Tomorrow is Saturday. Perhaps you will go to the grocery store and find yourself tip dancing, tip, tap dancing on the tips of your toes in the cereal aisle, finding something new glowing and growing inside of you, a blooming field, a forest. Could it be an entire meadow of these purple cotton balls riding wild? It doesn't matter. You are being asked to do something wild and amazing and alive with all of the love that is livid, electric, and alive within you. There is a wisdom that is calling your name, that is blooming you forth into this very moment. Tomorrow is Saturday and the next day is Sunday, and I would be surprised if you don't rise to the dawn and meet your own face in the mirrors of your own poems and see something new inside of your eyes, a freshness that the grief could not be realized through seeing itself blooming, brand spanking new. It's a new day for you, sweet sister soul, running this railroad card of love into the future and above and beyond your wildest dreams. We want all of your dreams to come true. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you also. Thank you. Melinda, do we have time for one more? Yes. Okay. I know I said one. Hello, love. Hello. How are you, Scott? You made yourself better. It couldn't have happened. You know this, right?
Hello.
Hi. How are you? You know how I am.
You're always love, Vanessa.
It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Is there anything that you want to say before I, okay, two things. Would you please say your name?
Rebecca Pietri.
Can you take a deep breath and let it out, and then please say it 2 more times?
Rebecca Pietri. Rebecca Pietri.
And asking of yourself, what do you need or want inside of this moment? And it can be anything, don't say it out loud. Keep it for your heart, inside of your heart, please. Acknowledging that your heart is a profoundly powerful place. So, you know that I'm going to ask you for ingredients,
Yes.
but I'm going to ask you first, is there anything that you want to say right now?
No, I always love coming to see you, Vanessa.
Okay. So we need a name, a color, and a purpose. A name should be any name. It should feel right to you before you say it. And when you say it out loud, it should feel good to say. And the color should be a color that feels right to you before you say it. You say it out loud, it should feel good. And the purpose, by dint of this moment happening, anything.
Ella.
Ella.
Love.
Ella love.
And red.
And red. Ella love and red. Okay. Here. Thank you. Ella love and red, this song of love pulsing out of our hearts and out of our bodies into these wild city streets everywhere we go, an entire tornado, a vortex of love, replete with the light and the possibility of infinite healing. In this very moment, we sit here profound on our asses. We sit here profound in the light of our own eyes with the capacity to move around this life in our breath breath and in our bodies, and with the freedom to smile and to lift up our eyes here inside of the swirling, rising, turning, luminous vortex of light that is our very eyes, that is the blooming moves, the grin that Ella would pull through her cheeks even when days would try to roll her down the street like an errant trash can in a hurricane. Oh, pulling the grin up from the bottoms of your shoes, pulling a grin up. Ella sings the blues, pulling the grin up to her eyes, enough to arch her eyebrows, even enough to make the bones of her great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother sigh in a watery grave, rising up in this very instant. We call forth all of the power from all of the bodies to bring forth the loving, healing, knowing rise as potent as the very first time the color red saw its own face in the eyes of this universe. We are alive inside of this infinite momentum, which is what you call forth in this Ella Love Red moment. Something about us rising the escalator into the sky of our own infinite possibility, not pretending any longer that it is an act of power to simply vote. Hereforth we call this vehicle of being forth, this healing, knowing, loving, this healing, knowing, loving, this healing, knowing, loving rocket ship of brilliant, bright red isness into the cosmic consciousness that makes me be you and I be you and we be here together in this zoomless space, one to one and heart to heart and flesh to flesh. I love you, baby. And if it's quite all right, I see you, baby. Through all these lonely nights, baby, trust in me when I say, oh, pretty baby, if it's quite all right, I love you, baby. Through all these lonely nights, I need you, baby. I need you, baby. Trust in me and I'll say, okay. I love you, baby. And if it's quite all right, I'll count on this love, maybe. It'll get me through some lonely nights, oh, baby. Trust in me when I say you can trust your heart all the way. My pretty baby, if it's quite all right, I'll love you forever, baby. Past and through all these lonely, sad nights, I love you, baby. Love you forever, if that's okay. I love you forever, and that's okay. This love is forever, and it is mighty fine if we don't ever try to go back in time. We're fine to move forward with your hand in mine. We'll be just fine, we'll be okay. We'll make it through and make brand new days. We don't need no spaceship, we ride up into the cosmos just like this. My eyes in your eyes and my eyes in your eyes. This is the most infinite technology, and they'll all be surprised when we harness it at the same time and give zero fucks about all of the lines and all of the raps and all of the traps that they use to try to confine us here inside of these days. I love you, baby. Thank you. I wanted to say thank you for being here. I want to honor the fact that you are whole and you are mighty and you are powerful and you have within you the power to transcend any fear that would try to keep you or be an obstacle to you inhabiting the fullness and the wholeness of both your love and your life at the very same time. I hope that you have sweet dreams tonight and that you breathe in within yourself the capacity to feel safe wherever you are. And that if you do not feel safe wherever you are, I breathe into myself and out into this room a holding of deep safety for you, that you might feel absolutely awakened and alive in the electric power and love of your own life. Thank you all who came up here. I appreciate you all deeply. You made this a night for me that I